Hey, good evening, everyone. This is Stacy Lake for my February 2nd rendition of Let's Talk Jackson, where I talk about county politics in Jackson County, Missouri. And today we are doing a deep dive into the situation that's going on in Jackson County government with our current budget. Now, for people who are unaware, usually, and when I say usually, on non-election years, the Jackson County budget is usually passed around December 31st of the year. So next year's proposed budget is generally passed on December 31st. But for this year, we currently are still operating on last year's budget. And uh, in summary, the reason why we are operating on last year's budget is because the Jackson County, after the Jackson County executive Frank White proposed his recommended budget to the Jackson County legislature, the Jackson County legislature amended his budget with their own recommendations, and Frank White vetoed that their recommendations. And so this is where the budget is today. And he didn't just veto their recommendations. According to a lot of legislators, he vetoed the entire budget. So currently speaking, we are just operating on last year's 2024 budget until they figure out what's going on. In this Jackson County, in this Let's Talk Jackson, we're going to go into detail about what happened with this budget. We're first going to start with what occurred on this timeline. So on December 2nd of 2024 of this year, the recommended budget is first placed on this agenda. And the reason why I have this noted in my notes is because, generally speaking, the recommended budget is historically proposed on earlier dates. I went back through the actual history of when the Jackson County executive and the legislature actually puts the budget on the agenda. And I'm just going to go through some of the dates to show how this is getting, it's ever since 2018, the recommended budget has always been getting gradually later on the docket. So we start in 2018. The recommended budget would be first placed on the agenda on November 16th, 2017. So that's 2018. In 2019, it was November 19th. In 2020, it was November 18th. 2021, it was November 18th. 2020 was November 18th. 2021 and 22, it was November 23rd and 22nd. 2023, it was November 28th. And this year, our recommended budget was first placed on the agenda on November 27th. The 2024 last year was placed on the agenda on November 27th, but this year it was placed on the agenda for December 2nd. So that meant that the Jackson County legislature only had less than 30 days to go over this budget recommendations, amend the budget, and pass the budget through the legislature to see if the county executive would approve of the budget, which if the county executive approves the budget, it would be signed into law. But if the county executive vetoes the budget, then that means it would go back to the legislature where they would have to either decide to overrule the veto or to allow his veto to be upheld. So starting in December 2nd, 2024, this is when the 2020, at this time, the At this time, the 2025 recommended budget is sent to the legislature as a whole with no recommendation for the amendment. And this is because Jalen Anderson needed, and Jalen Anderson was our budget chair during that time. He needed more time to discuss with the legislators about the budget and what amendments they wanted to place forth to this budget. And I have a clip that goes over Jalen Anderson's placing this on hold.
Ordinance 5902.
To adopt the annual budget and set forth appropriations for the various spending agencies and the principal subdivisions thereof for the fiscal year ending December 31st, 2025. Legislature as a whole.
Motion to hold.
Second.
All right, this ordinance will be held in committee.
Madam Chair, to inquire,
Yes, Legislator Barker.
to either yourself or the budget chair, what is the process for finalizing the budget for 2025? What's the next step that we can anticipate? I think we've got a series of meetings this week, but is there going to be a rectification from the request that you made on Monday, or what's the next steps?
Legislator Anderson, do you want to speak to that? And then I will
Be glad to.
speak to what my intention is. Go ahead.
Again, as we always do every year, there are usually meetings that go on between legislators to try to figure out what they would like to see changed in the budget. As of this morning, I've only gotten a response from 3 of my colleagues. 4 and 5, and I'm not including myself. I know what I would like to change. So I'm still waiting to hear from everyone so that we can at least form some sort of a budget amendment so that it can be put forward.
I guess to follow up on that, then, Legislator, I guess I thought that the responses were going to Legislator Marshall. Is that not the case, or are they supposed to go to you?
Have you sent one to Legislator Marshall?
Now I'm going to give some context to what's going on right now. So he's no longer our budget chair, but our budget chair in 2024 was Jalen Anderson. And as budget chair, he is responsible for putting forth the amendments to the budget that the legislature would ultimately pass. So the amendments to County Executive Frank White's recommended budget. And I'm not disclosing this without permission, because you'll see in the clip he discloses this himself. But Jackson County legislator Jalen Anderson was going through some health issues, and due to this, he had to have Megan Marshall's help with organizing the budget and proposing the future amendments to it. And this is exactly what they're talking about, because some of the legislators are confused as to who they need to communicate with in order to help Jalen or help Megan to have this amended budget that they will ultimately try to pass through the legislature.
Well,
Send it to both. It doesn't matter, either or. To date, I've only received 2. So if you have one, please send it.
say what now?
I said it can go to
No,
either.
I'm just asking for process. Are we sending it to you, or are we sending it to the legislator?
The emails that I sent to everyone requested that it be sent to me. If you want to include the whole body, that's fine.
No. I was just asking from a clarification point, because he said no, he'd only received 3. So that's why I was confused.
The ones
basically.
I've received, I share with the budget chair. I think
Right.
the issue now, well, go ahead. You can finish, Legislator Anderson.
The issue is that I have thought that it would be best to wait to hear from everybody before I put forward a budget amendment, just as courtesy, and trying to form that all together. And then once that's put together and it's put forward, then we can move forward on the budget. But until I hear from everyone, I'm not going to not allow a legislator to put their input on the budget.
Just to follow up on that, so I just want to be clear. So is Vice Chair Marshall leading the budget process, or is the budget chair?
Wow. Okay. So we'll try to do this again. Because of health issues, which you gladly tweeted about without my knowing, which is great, and I appreciate that so much, spreading out my business. But the chair had asked Legislator Marshall to help me because of medical issues that are going on. which again, I'm so glad you tweeted out about. So the fact of the matter is, when we can work together to figure this out and figure out the budget in the end. So that's how this works, because it's fascinating. Legislator Marshall and I can talk to each other over the phone, through email, through text. So we're both coming at this because I did need help, and I still do need help because of some medical issues. So yes, both of us are running this, but I'm still the budget chair.
So that
The reason why I'm showing you this clip is to clearly show the dysfunction of the Jackson County Legislature right now. As I stated before, this is December 17th. Frank White's recommended budget was put on the agenda and given to the full Jackson County Legislature on December 2nd. That means that every single party had, at this time, 2 weeks to review this budget and to make their recommendations or make their proposed amendments to give them to Jalen, but that hasn't happened yet. Right now, they're basically stating that it's because of this miscommunication with Jalen, but I think that there's some ulterior motives with this, which I will get into later. But let's continue this clip.
I want to clarify that because I don't think you were included on Megan Marshall's request as we were to respond. So I responded to Vice Chair Marshall with my feedback, but I don't think there's been an additional proactive request to have another conversation. So I want to get that clear. And then finally, I want to understand what our initial conversations with the budget chair were and how those got input into the budget submissions that occurred, I think, the end of last month. Because there was a process where you did submit, I believe, at least a draft of what the recommendations were.
A draft of what?
Did you not have the auditor submit drafts within the accordance of the time frame?
Of our office's budget?
Correct, and the rest of the budget process.
And I would also say that, as you can see in this confusion, one of the missteps I think that happened, if you look at my flow chart, is on December 16th, 2024, the recommended budget is moved from the budget committee to the full council. And honestly, at this stage, it should have just stayed in the budget committee until they had a proposed recommendation for an amended proposal, which did not happen. But let's continue.
I'm confused. Of course we always do that. I don't understand. That's always been done, that we have the auditor send those.
Right, so what I'm trying to clarify is that information did not ever make it into our proposed budget book for whatever reason. And so it is unclear when we had conversations individually not 3 weeks ago, what that process, where that went, if that was included in Legislator or Vice Chair Marshall's processes, or if we're starting over completely. It's unclear where we're at in the budgeting process, and we're hitting some narrow roads here. So
Okay.
I just want to get some clarity on
Let me provide clarity, because it seems to be that with the emails that I sent out to the entire legislative body asking for your input on budget amendments was for the entire book. Prior to that recommended budget book being published, if there were specific things that were put out by the legislators, whether it was your individual office budget or what have you, that didn't make it into the recommended book that we all have, then by all means include that in the amendment that you would like to see in the adopted budget. If you send it to me, great. I will share that with the entire body, as I did with the emails that I've sent out. So if there's something that is not in the budget that anyone would like to see, whether it's your individual office budgets or just the budgets across the county, please include that in the template that I have sent to everybody twice now. And then we will ensure that all of that is accounted for in the amendment that the entire body puts forward to the administration so they can continue the rest of the process. Is there anyone else that is still unclear about that?
So the previous submissions were acknowledged from the administration or not?
I don't know. All I'm saying is right
Question
now,
to the
if it's not in the budget book that we have, the recommended budget book, please let me know, and I will ensure that it's included in the amendment so that it can go forward in the process to getting into the adopted
Vice Chair
budget
Marshall,
book.
there are entire department budgets that are also missing from that book. So
Include that in the amendment process.
that is the administration's included, not mine.
Then don't worry about it. They'll include it in their process when they respond to our amendment.
It's our fiduciary responsibility to worry
Then
about.
include it in your amendment, Legislator
So
Barker.
again, back to the administration. Are our budgets-
We are moving
are
on
our
because we are
budgets included or not?
legislator.
I'm showing this to everyone because this is the current state of our Jackson County legislature, and to show everyone the dysfunction and why we are at where we are today, which is we have no budget. We are operating off of the 2024 budget that was passed last year. But let's continue.
Legislator Barker, you are out of order, and if you will not
Madam Chair,
get back in order,
these are viable questions that I don't understand why you don't
I
want to
just
hear.
provided the clarity that you asked for.
No, the administration has not confirmed whether or not our submission, our budget.
Is it in the recommended budget book?
That doesn't make any
Is
sense.
it in the
Neither
recommended
are
budget book?
actual funds.
Legislator
The
Barker,
budget
you're
book
out of
is
order, and we're moving on.
incomplete.
We're moving
The
on.
reality is, we can shout each other down. That's fine.
Can you please come forward here? We have a member that's out of order. We're trying to conduct this meeting. If you have further questions for the administration, then I suggest you have a conversation with the administration. Right now,
So at this moment, Megan Marshall actually waives the bailiff over in order to get Manny out of the room. But Manny at that time composes himself when he should have done that earlier on. But let's continue.
nobody has the floor. We are moving on.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
The reason why Manny goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is that under the rules for a meeting, you have to have 5 legislators present for a quorum. And so what you're about to witness is Manny leaving the room along with another, if my memory serves me right, and Vanessa already left. And so he's signaling to the people that are in his so-called alliance to also join him to leave in order to obstruct this meeting, but that doesn't happen. Let's watch.
If you would like to leave and obstruct the meeting, then go right ahead. We'll go into recess. Ordinance 5903, Madam Clerk.
So at that moment, they basically table the or hold the whole entire proposed budget until the next day that they meet, which is on December 19th. And basically on December 19th, Budget Chair Jalen Anderson asked to hold the budget again in order to receive the comments from each of the legislators' concerns because he hasn't received them yet. Now this is on December 19th, meaning that now we're more past 2 weeks since each of the legislators have had this proposed budget this recommended budget from Frank White that they could have offered their amendments, but it hasn't happened yet.
Legislator Anderson, would you give a brief update on where we're at with that and what the plan is to move forward?
Yes, Madam Chair. To my colleagues, many of you have sent along some type of information regarding outside agencies and what you've wanted to see with the budget. I have not heard from everyone, so I still want to leave that open so that we can hear still from everybody, or at least some email to say, no, I don't want anything, or whatever is best, whatever that might be, because I still want to have everyone's opinion before I move forward. I don't want to put forward an amendment or amendments that don't have or haven't taken into consideration each legislator's concerns or what they have wanted to see in the amendment as a whole. So that's my push, that we can all get that pulled together so that we can get this budget amendment forward and we can discuss it and hopefully pass a budget here within the next few days.
Yeah. So at this moment, so it's December 19th. Jalen is still waiting on other legislators to give them their proposed amendments to the budget, and it hasn't been received yet, which I think was in bad faith. And before I continue, I want to give a disclaimer that everything that I say is alleged, and nothing that I say in this podcast is meant to be construed as a legal opinion or as fact. These are just my own opinions. My own opinions of Stacy Lake. But anyways, the next meeting that happens on this budget is on December 23rd, 2024. And in this meeting, it is noted that on the day prior at 3 p.m., Budget Chair Jalen Anderson and Vice Chair Megan Marshall, they actually send a file called budget adjustments to the legislature that are not amendments, because they specifically state that these are a list of recommendations in order to make the finalized amendment list, and that these are just adjustments. They essentially at this meeting want to have a public discussion on each of these adjustments that the legislators have recommended in order to vote or decide which one of those adjustments should go into the final amendment. But as we will see in this clip, they basically, again, and when they say they, I'm talking about Manny, Duran, Sean Smith, Vanessa Husky, and Donna. They basically delay this using the excuse that they need to really look at the adjustments in order to grasp what's going on before they can have this discussion. But as I'll get into later, I think this was made in bad faith, because remember, this next clip I'm going to show you is going to be December 23rd. That means that now the legislators have had over 21 days to look at Frank White's recommended budget and put forth their recommendations, and then submit and vote on the amended budget that they would propose to Frank White to pass. But this has still not happened yet, and time is running out.
And the purpose of our conversation today, you should have all received two files. One is, the first one, I think you received around 3 o'clock yesterday, is titled Budget Adjustments. And these are the adjustments that have been presented to the budget chair and Legislator Marshall, who have been working together to modify the budget. They are not amendments. Right now, they are just adjustments that have been recommended. So today, our discussion is to determine which of these are favorable or not favorable to the legislature to include in an amendment, one whole amendment that would be incorporated into the budget. So again, today we're just talking about these as adjustments. We're going to do them one by one. I don't believe it requires
And before we get into this, I want to say that this whole concept of adjustments is actually it's kind of weird, because usually around this time the legislature would have their proposed amended budget to vote on, to send to the county executive to see if he would veto or pass at this time. But I really honestly think the reason why they're trying to have this discussion is that there were a bunch of questionable amendments, and they wanted to have this public discussion in order to feather out which amendments are unfavorable to the ones that were. And I have a comment here by Tracy, who states that Legislator Abarca is totally out of control, which, yes, I agree with. But I mean, this is basically his behavior that he's been exhibiting all this time. So, I mean, you know, what can you do, right? Like, it's just what it is. So, but anyways, I'm going to continue this clip.
Mr. Kaminsky, it doesn't require necessarily a formal motion, would it?
No, it's
Okay.
how the legislator would like to proceed.
Okay. So we will go through these one by one, determine whether there's an up or down favorability to include it in an amendment. And then once we have these done, then we will hand this over to the county auditor to put together the increasing, decreasing entry as a whole for one amendment, incorporating which ones you have determined to be favorable.
Madam Chair,
Yes, sir.
I would like to make a motion to hold this.
Second.
And would you like to explain the purpose?
I think that the legislature needs more time to consider these one by one, and I would like to take this up next week.
That would be Monday?
Yes.
Madam Chair,
Yes, sir.
I guess for discussion. Yeah, I mean, I don't understand even the process for discussion as it relates to talking about them. I mean, is it a straw poll that we're suggesting here as the mechanism to decide whether or not we make a motion? I mean, I don't understand why we wouldn't just make a motion to adopt all of it at that point, because I'm not sure that we have the ability even to do the process that we're talking about under Robert's rules.
See, this is the beginning of the bad faith, in my opinion, because instead of having an open and public discussion, and these open and public discussions should have happened in the budget committee level, but never did because, in my opinion, it was prematurely taken from the budget committee and put to legislature as a whole. So instead of having these discussions in a public forum, they're basically asking again to delay this until they can put forth their own motion or put forth their own amendments. As we'll see later on, and I'll explain in greater detail why I think it's bad faith. They had ample enough time to make these recommended amendments and have these open discussions with the public in order to explain to the public why they are going to propose such drastic changes to our budget, which I'm definitely going to cover. But they did not. But let's continue.
I don't think there's a process for the amendments that, other than if the legislator as a body would like to vote individually or as a group on those. So I think it's how the legislator would like to proceed. There's multiple amendments, and I'm understanding that this was a way to get a resolution of which ones were being recommended by the legislature.
That's also a way to have veto process be very finite in line item ways that to me, this is not organized.
You see, Manny's now talking about the veto, but let's continue.
In any stretch of the process that I've been a part of for 2 years. So it is baffling as to how we've included these. I mean, there are question marks here as to how things got included without any names. Like what happens to there's just, I would
really listen to Manny's words. You want to look for specificity, okay? And I'll let you know that there really isn't any specificity. Let's continue.
I would concur that a hold is necessary here to understand what's going on with this budget, where it's going to impact, why. There's just more work to be done from the budget committee, my perspective on this.
What work? It's never answered. There's no specifics being pushed. And honestly, if I was Jalen in this situation, I would have pressed Manny and be like, why can't we discuss this right now in this open forum? But I think because of situations outside of Jalen's control, basically his health, I don't think he was the right person to do that. And honestly, I think that there was trust here that they believed. And when I say they, I mean like Jalen, Megan, Jeannie, and Charlie believed that they honestly just needed more time to review this. Personally, I don't think that was the case, but let's continue.
This information came from solicitation of input from the legislators to the budget chair.
I'm well aware because myself and Sean Smith seem to be the only ones who made that process noted.
And if there's no other individuals noted, they did not provide the input.
Okay. So.
Point of inquiry before we do a vote on the hold. I just want to, and this is clarification for, I guess, Legislator Marshall. She, I think, kind of put this process together. I used it a little differently, I think, maybe than some of my colleagues. So I'm seeing the from and to column, and my background's accounting, so that's probably why, as like if I'm taking some money out of this and I'm putting it into here, that's how I understood. And it looks like in some cases there's just a 2, which I guess suggests that it's just a net increase. I guess just so I look at this accurately, should things be netting out, I guess is the bottom line.
Legislator Smith, this document that I put together is a copy and paste of exactly what was sent to me. So if there was nothing in the from or to column, that's how it was sent to me. The only thing I added to this document was the line item next to each item. I didn't alter anything that any legislator sent to me requesting. And so how you see it is how I received it.
Okay, and I was more inquiring, like, what was the intent? Was it the intent that things should balance, or is it, does it matter?
Of course that matters. As far as balancing and the increase and decrease, that's under the county auditor's purview. The intent here with this was to make everyone aware of what was submitted so that we could have discussions on what was submitted and what would be requested
Okay,
of the legislature.
got it. Thank you.
Point of inquiry.
Yes, Legislator Bach?
In the past, I don't believe the auditor has balanced to what Vice Chair Marshall has suggested. That is not, in my perspective or process as the budget chair in the past, their job. It's the budget chair and the budget committee's responsibility. And so that's why I'm a little confused as to how we got this document that is, it's not an amendment. It's not an adjustment. These are collection of thoughts, which is great, but there needed to be more discussion to get us to this point. I think, again, this is the reason why we must hold this, because this is not organized at all to make adjustments. And I would even question, I think Legislator Smith and I did things a little backwards as it comes to the from and to in several of these lines. And although the balancing does make a difference, we have some parameters under the rules that require us to meet certain thresholds within the executive's recommended budget. And so there have to be necessary cuts to equate for inclusion of increases. And I don't know that any of this balances. In fact, the spreadsheet doesn't work itself because at the bottom, the grand total reference numbers are wrong. They're not included. So this document itself is wrong. So there's just a lot of work left to do here.
Okay. First of all, this is not uncommon process in government to do line item and to have discussion about it, particularly when you're going through an appropriation process and looking at line by line to determine what is favorable and what is not. So this is not something made up. It is not unique. This is common within government budget process.
Point of information from where? It's not what I did in the school board.
The state.
So just as clarification, Jeannie, before she was a Jackson County legislator, was a state rep.
Legislator McGee, is that your familiarity with that process? Is that accurate in your assumption?
And also clarification, Deron McGee was also a state rep until he had to resign in 2009 due to the Missouri Ethics Commission substantiating claims of sexual harassment that he did to his own employee.
Assessment as well?
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, I serve on the budget committee, but typically we're doing that process where we're offering up these ideas, but they're offered as amendments. I mean, we vote them up or down. I think my concern is that I don't know about anybody else. I appreciate the work that Legislator Marshall and Legislator Aaron have done on this. I did not see the document that was sent to me until late last night, and so I just want more time to review. I'm not questioning the process in which you all did. I'm not questioning that. I just, for my own sake, want more time to go through the document that was sent to me yesterday, and I didn't see it until late last night. And so to go through this exercise of saying what I'm for, casting over what I'm for or against, I just would like more time. That is what my request is. And so I'm not questioning the process in which you did it. I'm just sort of asking for more time to review the information that was sent to me.
And this sounds very reasonable. When I was listening to it, I was like, yeah, like you had a document sprung on us the day before and you're asking us to actually debate about the amendments or the proposed adjustments before we had this amendment. we need more time, which I also agree. They received this document literally 24 hours before they wanted them to actually debate on this. But as you'll see later on, I don't think that this was a 100% genuine reason why they wanted to delay talking about the proposed amendments. So this discussion happened on December 23rd, 2024. The next time they meet and speak publicly about this budget is on December 30th, 2024. And at this meeting, the Jackson County Legislature introduces 2 amendments to the budget on the floor. The Jackson County Legislature basically votes on these amendments to the proposed budget. These 2 amendments were made by Manny Abarca and Sean Smith. And Budget Chair Jalen Anderson is against it for multiple reasons, primarily due to one, there wasn't inclusion of the Housing Resource Commission's budget of $200,000, and that there were large cuts to the department, to a lot of the departments in Jackson County. Now, for people who don't know, the Housing Resource Commission is the commission that was established to end homelessness in Jackson County. And so Jalen thought that this was important to discuss. However, as you'll see, I don't think Jalen was in good health to really lead that fight as to why not funding the Housing Resource Commission, or why these cuts were so drastic. But we're going to get into it. But let me show you this quick clip.
Madam Chair, there's an amendment to the budget that was distributed by our legislative auditor. I'd like to propose that we introduce that amendment.
Okay, and I believe that has been handled by legal as well.
Whitney Miller with the County Counselor's Office. The format of the amendment and the ordinance itself are very different, so budget is still working on getting it in that form. I think you can still vote on it in its current format that it was sent to us. We would just still have to put it into, we didn't have time to get it in something to hand out yet.
Okay, but there are no
Because
changes.
they aren't an apples to apples, if that makes sense, same as last year.
All right,
But we don't have any objection to you voting on the amendment in the format that it was sent around. We just still would have to get it in an actual formal document after.
okay, thank you. Is that a motion?
Move to adopt the amendment as distributed.
Second.
Okay, Madam Clerk, would you please call roll?
Anderson,
No.
Payton,
Yes.
Marshall,
No.
Abarca. Was that a yes? Yes, I couldn't.
That was a yes.
Okay. Husky,
Yes.
Franklin, McGee,
Yes.
Smith,
Yes.
Lauer.
No.
5 yes, 4 no.
Before we get into what Jalen says, notice that before the vote, there was no discussion about the proposed amendments to this budget, on why they were good or why they were bad. But let's continue.
I second it.
Okay, and to be clear of the perfection of the ordinance, is that correct?
Yes.
As amended.
As amended.
And that would require 5 votes? All right.
Anderson, Payton,
Yes.
Marshall,
No.
Abarca. Husky,
Yes.
Franklin, McGee,
Yes.
Smith,
Yes.
Lauer.
No.
5 yes, 4 no.
Are there any other motions?
For adoption, we need 6.
Whitney Miller with the Counselor's Office. You can adopt with 5 votes unless there's an objection, in which case it would take a 6th vote.
Got it. Thank you.
I'm sorry, would you repeat?
Whitney Miller with the Counselor's Office. You can perfect and adopt in the same meeting with 5 votes unless there's an objection, in which case it would take a 6th vote.
Madam Chair.
Legislator Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to speak on the amendment. Of course, the reason why I voted against this is because, as many of my colleagues have mentioned, the interest in funding Housing Resources Commission that was not in this amendment, which I know that has been a worry, and also from conversations about the $100,000 or $200,000 total in Housing Resources Commission, which was not put in here, and that is one of the major reasons of my decision not to vote for it, but also the amount of cuts to different departments with folks who do a lot of good work, in my judgment, and that is my reason for not being for this amendment. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. Thank you. Any other discussion?
No other
Right.
discussion.
Did we have a second?
So basically, remember, this happened on December 30th, okay? Now, on December 31st, the ordinance, which is the budget with the amendments, which is called Ordinance 5902, was passed 5-4. The votes for final passages for this ordinance was Donna Payton, Manny Abarca, Vanessa Husky, Deron McGee, and Sean Smith. And the 4 votes in opposition was Megan Marshall, Jalen Anderson, Charlie Franklin, and Jeannie Laurel. Now, let's get into what these what these changes were and why they were so controversial in the first place. Now, I'm going to make sure you guys can see this. So the first amendment that I'm going to show you is the one that was proposed, and both of these were passed. And this is the one, like, as a combined document. But this was the amendment that was proposed by Sean Smith. And you see here the general fund, we have county counselor, or county council, county executive office, budget office, legislature as a whole, and leave in general fund, okay? So then we have personal salaries, legal services, personal salaries, right? So these are specific amendments that Sean Smith wanted to make to the county counselor's office, which is basically the county's attorney's offices, okay? The attorneys that represent the county. So, for instance, if property tax situation, the Jackson County government has its own legal counsel in-house. If you slip and fall at a park and break your leg and you sue the Jackson County Parks Department for improper maintenance, it's the county counselor's office that takes that case. But also the county counselors takes basically inquiries from other departments, basically asking them if certain actions are legal or to give legal opinions. So the county counselors is a very, I can't stress this enough, is a very, very important department in the county government. And I state this because I know that there's so much animosity right now in the legislature and maybe amongst some members of our community against our county attorneys. But you have to recognize is that the county counselor's office, their number one duty is to represent the county. It's not to represent the county executive. It's not to represent the county legislature. It's to represent the county government, and that is what they're employed to do. Now, in these, and I preface that because these, what Sean Smith is proposing here is essentially on the first line is he wants to decrease the county counselor's office salaries budget $1.2 million. Actually, it's $1,270,652. Okay? And the reason why he wants to do this is because he wants to, and I'm saying this, what it states in this document, is he wants to hire outside attorneys with legislative approval for all litigation. I'm going to explain to you why this is nuts, okay? And I'm explaining to you this as from my experiences as an attorney, and dealing with firms and how billing practices happen, or what billing practices are like running a legal law firm. Now, the reason why so many corporations and governmental entities have in-house legal counsel is because overall the legal expenses will be greatly reduced. So, for instance, you're hiring, say you have an in-house counsel of 5 people, right? They're all on salaries of $80,000. I'm just putting salaries, just out there. So that means you have 5 attorneys, $80,000 a year. That means their salaries are capped at $400,000 a year. So that means no matter how much work they put into a case, how many hours they spend in litigation, the most that you'll have to pay, and we're not talking about overtime pay, I'm just talking about general 9 to 5 pay, is going to be $400,000. That's not the same as if you hire outside counsel. Anybody who has been involved in a litigation knows that when you hire outside counsel, you're not paying them a salary. You're paying them you're not paying them a yearly salary. You're paying them by the hour. And the way that a lot of these firms operates is that they'll enter into a contract with the county government, basically saying that they'll do all these legal services for a cap, right? And so the county government will give them, like, for instance, $1.3 million and say, you have to handle these things and this is your cap. And so they have a responsibility to do certain things within the cap. But if they exceed the cap, they can literally go back to the county government and be like, hey, you gave us all these cases, we're billing you $500, $600, $900 an hour to handle all these cases, and now your cap is out. I'll give you an example of what I mean by this. So, there was a case that I had a long time ago that was against this massive corporation. And essentially, my client had a simple personal injury case where her damages to her health were less than $5,000. And so when I took this case, I thought, hey, this is going to be quick, because it was one of those cases where everyone knew that the corporation had liability, because to not get into too much details of this case, it was a situation where the corporation was 100% at fault for this person's injuries, and it was on video, so there was no question as to liability to this. And so I email the attorney. I'm like, hey, it's clear on this video that your corporation is liable. Why don't we just do a quick settlement, because her injuries were less than $5,000? And the attorney literally wrote to me, I don't see things that way. We're going to take this all the way to trial. And so I look at the email and I'm like, this is weird. It's a $5,000, injury, meaning that, this case is probably value around, and I'm just putting out numbers, around probably like $20,000, right? And I'm just like, that's weird. Like, wouldn't they want to get this resolved? Because it's clear that they did this, okay? So anyways, we have to go through the whole Monty. We have to go through depositions. We have to go through motion practice. And it's literally a week before the trial. And the other side, the attorneys call me and they're like, hey, why don't we give you this to settle the case? And I was like, oh, sure, like we can settle the case, but I don't understand like why we didn't settle the case before. And so then I talked to the mediator, and this is a case that happened 5 years, or like a long time ago. It's like 5 years ago. And the mediator told me, and this is when I started learning about how insurance companies and corporate law firm representation started to work. The mediator basically said, look, Stacy, these law firms, they work in caps. It's not, hey, this case has a value of this, I have to keep my attorney's fees at a certain level. It's, this corporation will give this law firm $5 million and basically have them in a contract saying that you can't expend more than $5 million on for the entire year. And so what happens is that they take the smaller cases and they over litigate those cases, because even though this case had a personal injury that was less than $5,000, they're billing this corporation, $50, $100, possibly $200,000 in attorney's fees for this case that really only had a value of $20,000. And that's because this corporation, they only look at caps. They don't look at how these firms are individually litigating each of these cases, so they're able to get away with it. And I preface that, I say that story first because, like, for instance, if we had a simple county case that would involve maybe like 5 hours of attorney's work, right? We have a salaried employee at Jackson County who's probably only making $80,000 a year, and she'll do those hours plus other cases on top of that, right? But if you have a private law firm doing that, it's not going to be, what that general salary is. It's going to be, you're going to be paying for the main lawyer, which is probably going to run you $350 to $400 an hour, the assistant attorney, which is going to run you like $200 an hour, the paralegal, that's going to cost you around $150 an hour, and maybe even assistant, and those bills pile up where you're literally paying $950 per hour on this case that could have been this case could have been handled by your in-house counsel that would have saved you like so much money for doing the exact same work. And that's why for me it's just unconscionable to say, hey, instead of spending, that's my first point. Instead of spending this money on retaining our in-house counsel, we're going to hire a private litigation firm that's only going to be able to do, or that's going to do their job, but only 20% of their job because of the costs associated with that, right? But also, you're literally playing with people's livelihoods. Like, if this proposed amendment goes through, so many attorneys are going to lose their job. I just want to put that out there. Like, so many attorneys in this economy are going to lose this job for what? For what? For what purpose? And I just like for me, it just doesn't, for me, when I think about ways to help the county, gutting the legal department is not the answer. Like, that is definitely not the answer. And here there's a note that says leave $500,000 for personnel in county counselor's office. $500,000 is not going to, at most you can get 5 attorneys to do what? To litigate for the entire county? Like, that's just ridiculous. And then what are you going to say? Who's going to fire those other attorneys that have been working overtime on this case? And that's why I think it's unconscionable, and it gives a little bit of vindictiveness, because these are people's livelihoods now that might be affected not because they're doing a bad job, but because the legislature doesn't agree with the job that they're doing, which is a difference. And I say that because, look, anybody will know I'm the biggest, I hate how the Jackson County government did their property tax assessment in 2020, in 2019 and 2023. I think it was illegal. I think it was improper, and ultimately, I think it should have been reversed because of those reasons listed below, and also as I stated in my prior videos. However, the county counselor's office, they won every single case against that was brought against them, meaning that they were effective in their positions. Now, I caveat that because the case that happened in the summer, I think that they would have lost that case if not for the Andrew Bailey situation, which if you want to know more about the Andrew Bailey situation, check out my earlier videos where I go into great detail about that. But the Attorney General's office messed up that case. Jackson County Counselor's office did not. They won that case. And so they are being an effective body, even if the legislature doesn't agree with them. And so that's why just things like this just breaks my heart, because these people are actually working, they're actually doing what they need to do via the charter, they're protecting the Jackson County government, okay, whether people want to agree with them or not. Now, the other changes he wants to do is with the budget office, okay? So the budget office is the county executive offices and the budget office, okay? So if we scroll over here, he wants to reduce the county executive's office budget by $590,000, and this is specifically for salaries, okay? And he states reduce executive salaries by $450,000 plus associated costs. He says that this is because of Schulte's departing, but it doesn't specifically define that. And when I say that is, this is going to be a reduction for the county executive's budget for Troy Schulte's departure, but at the end of the day, they have to appoint another budget officer. So you're essentially giving the county executive's office $0 to appoint a budget officer, meaning they have to take that money somewhere else. They have to cut the county executive's office and take that money from somewhere else in order to hire a new budget officer, meaning other people in the county executive's office are going to lose their jobs or have a salary decrease, which I don't think is proper, especially in these economic times. Now, also, budget office, right? They want to reduce the budget office salary, or the budget office's salaries by $436,000, and his reasoning is reduce finance to reflect movement of budgeting staff onto legislature. Okay, now this is kind of crazy because of the fact that in the county charter, it's the county executive that's responsible for the budget. They're responsible for basically planning and for planning the budget and making the recommendations to the legislature. The legislature is only responsible for appropriation and passing that budget, but the Jackson County executive actually has a huge their responsibility is to ensure that that the county departments are financed and managed properly. And so in this, it seems as if Sean Smith's amendment is trying to take away power from the budget office and from the county executive and give it to the legislature, which I don't think is proper because of the charter. The legislature doesn't have this authority under the budget, or have this authority over the budget office. So now, $1.2 million, they want to move that, or $1.27 million, they want to move that from the county counselors, from inside the Jackson County government, to hire private attorneys, okay? But what about the two other expenditures from the county executive's office and the budget office that they're decreasing? Sean Smith proposes that they want to move finance budgeting function under legislature, which would be against the county charter, okay? But then for the $590,000, it states consider reduction of property tax levy with these savings, right? Which, I mean, that's good and all, but like I don't know if that's even possible, especially since they passed the levies around the same time that they passed this recommended budget. This is also what I want to show you, and this is why I think it is vindictive in nature, this proposed budget. We look at the assessment department, and I really want to say this very clearly, okay? Because a lot of people are mad at the assessment department. There's the assessment department, and then there's Tyler Technologies. The Jackson County Legislature, okay, they already gave Tyler Technologies approximately $18 million years ago. We can't get that money back, folks. They used, when I say they, the Jackson County government used ARPA fund money in order to give Tyler Technologies this money in order to do the 2019 assessment, 2019 and 2023 assessment. Now I state that because Tyler Technologies is an outside firm, is a private firm. So it's a contractor that we hire in order to do these assessments. This cut to the assessment department are literally going to take away people's jobs in the assessment department. In our Jackson County assessment department. It's not going to take away jobs from people in Tyler Technologies. It's taking away governmental jobs from these people that work in the assessment department. And Sean Smith is proposing reducing the assessment department's budget by $3.4 million, okay? And he states that they're going to reduce assessment staff to the 2023 level, which, I mean, take it for what it is. But if you think about that, those are salaries, okay? So they're literally going to fire with that amount. Sorry, my math is not that good. I'm trying to divide this by $50,000 roughly. So would it be around 200 people? Hold on a minute. Let me bring out my calculator really quickly. $68 people. If the average salary there was $50,000, that means that approximately 68 people would lose their jobs because of the salary amendment, which I don't agree with. Me personally, if I was county executive, I would return everything in-house. So that means that we wouldn't have a contract with Tyler Technologies anymore, and we would go back to how the assessment department was run years ago, which we wouldn't be relying on outside contractors in order to assess our properties. We would be relying on actual people, viewing actual homes, and doing that process completely in-house. And so I just don't agree with gutting the assessment department. So finally, there's a reduction in the Board of Equalization, which is of $587,000, and this is to reduce the commission's salary to statutory level, which I didn't research this part at all, but from my understanding, and this could be completely wrong, so just take it with a cup of salt or a teaspoon of salt or whatever, is that the reason why the BOE salaries had to be increased is because they were doing significant overtime. So, I mean, I would understand if they're not doing overtime, but, I mean, take it for what it is. Now, the next one, this is Manny's proposed adjustments to the budget. And I want to show you guys something really quickly. Just how like slapped together this is. So first off, over here, Manny doesn't even change what this ordinance is. So as you guys know, Manny was budget chair in 2023, okay? And he's basically using like some sort of form that he probably got in 2022 because this is on this corner, it refers to ordinance 5570, which was passed in 2021, okay? And of course it's not December 13th, 2021. So there's already those errors. But anyways, let's continue. This kind of falls with Sean Smith's adjustments that he recommended. And so as you see, these are the salaries that are being reduced. There's actually more reductions here. They want to reduce salaries, again, from the county counselor's office, from the county executive's office, the budget office, the communications department. They want to reduce finance department by $11.5 million and make like, so change it from $11.5 million to $559,000, right? And his reasoning here is reduction of staffing, as it is clear they're not hiring staff to increase 200% in 2 years, okay? So anyways, so these are basically huge salary decreases. From finance, from human resources, $1 million. And so then you have all these reductions. So the question is where is this money actually going to? Okay. This is where Manny is proposing to send all this money to. Now you see all this: legislators auditor's office, legislative compliance, legislative clerk of the county, legislature as a whole, right? He's trying to funnel all this money back to the legislature. And so here, for instance, auditor's office, he wants to increase the regular salaries by 200,000%, okay? I'm gonna try to keep this over here so I can like clearly show this. So auditor's office, he wants to increase the regular salaries by $600,000, okay? Legislative compliance office by $600,000. Clerk of the county's office, $600,000. Legislative as a whole, $300,000 for regular salaries, okay? They want to increase the advertising budget by $100,000. Gifts and awards by $10,000. They want to get a financial advisor for $100,000. They want to have legal services for $300,000. And other contractual services by $100,000. In addition to this, they want to increase the prosecuting attorney. If you guys didn't see, he misspells prosecuting attorney. He wants to increase the prosecuting attorney's regular salary budget by $9.2 million, okay? Which I have no idea why, okay? And I say that because, and when I say I have no idea why, is I haven't read anything from Melissa Johnson, who's our current prosecutor, or from Jean Peters Baker, who's our leaving prosecutor, basically suggesting the need for an increased budget with our prosecuting attorneys. But I could be wrong, but I haven't. Not for $9.2 million, and I think I would remember that. They want to increase the sheriff's office budget by $10 million, the corrections by $19 million, increase the budget for a primary election by $1 million, faculty's management by $4 million, and they want to give a park $250,000. Okay, and I say this because these are drastic swings that should have had a public discussion about, why they want to transfer one budget to the other. With ARPA, there were over 10 meetings, public hearings about utilizing ARPA dollars for certain nonprofits or for some certain intergovernmental transfers. But in this case, as far as I know, there wasn't really a large public hearing about these transfers. And I think that, for me, when I saw this, I was actually really angry, because at the end of the day, we have to realize that the county government employs, hundreds of people, and that their livelihoods depend on the function of the county government. And a lot of people are going to lose their jobs over this, especially when we're going into this economy, which I predict we're heading into another recession. But that's another topic for another day. But making these adjustments without a verbose discussion as to why you want to make these adjustments, to me is negligent. But this is my opinion alone. So a combination of Sean Smith and Manny's amendments was ultimately what was passed on December 30th, 2024. Or sorry, December 31st, 2024. So here is the actual ordinance that was actually put on the floor. And here are the votes again. It was 5-4. And so what happened next was Frank White vetoed this ordinance. And this is Frank White's veto message, which we're going to go into. But before we start with that, I want to first go over the email that Frank White sent to all the legislators. So Frank White vetoes this budget on January 9th, 2025. So approximately 10 days after it passes through the Jackson County legislature. And so he sends this email to the legislature, basically stating his reasonings as to why he had to veto this budget. And so he states, "Unfortunately, I was forced to veto the budget recently passed by a simple majority of county legislators. This was not a decision I took lightly, but was a necessary step to protect the interests of Jackson County residents and to ensure you have the resources needed to do your job. The changes made by this group of legislators would have seriously undermined our ability to deliver our commitments by 1. Cutting millions of dollars from important department governments that deliver essential services. 2. Giving an excessive increase to the legislature's budget, diverting funds away from other key priorities. And finally, ignoring critical infrastructure and maintenance needs that are vital to our future." Then he states, right now, the county legislature isn't scheduled to meet again until January 27th, 2025. Until they approve a new budget or override my veto with a supermajority, we will follow Missouri law, which will allow us to use last year's budget to cover the ongoing costs for operations and maintenance. So, in accordance to not only the Missouri statutes, but also to the Jackson County codes and to the charter, if the Jackson County government, so if the legislature and the county executive doesn't pass a budget, what happens is they revert to last year's operational and maintenance budget until they pass an amended budget. So currently speaking right now, we're still operating on the 2024 budget as if it was passed as our 2025. Now, here is the veto message from Frank White, and he goes into actually pretty good detail about his reasons why he vetoed this, which I'm going to just cover briefly. His reasons. First, it says public safety and essential services at risk. This budget cuts over $2 million from public safety personnel, including 60 positions in the Department of Corrections, directly jeopardizing the safety and security of our communities. 2. Harm to county associates and operations. The amendments defund multiple positions, forcing termination of hardworking county associates who dedicate their lives serving our residents. These individuals are not simply numbers on a ledger. They are the backbone of our government. Terminating these roles will weaken our ability to deliver the essential services that residents depend upon every day. Oh, also, even more troubling, this budget seeks to restructure the government in a way that would defund the entire budget office, crippling our ability to plan, manage, and oversee finances. The amendments would make severe cuts to the county councilor's office that they would render it would be impossible for the office to fulfill its legal duties. Next was legislative overreach. The legislature has attempted to move county departments under its direct control despite lacking the legal authority to do so, which I already explained. 4. Misaligned priorities. While slashing critical services and public safety funding, this budget includes the largest increase in the legislature's budget in Jackson County history. The leadership is about putting the needs ahead of others and not your own. I mean, this is the politicking, but yeah. They literally are decreasing budgets. They're reducing people's jobs. I mean, we're reducing the jobs in the department and firing people, taking away their jobs in order to increase their salaries. I mean, that's true. We already went over this. 5. Legal and fiscal irresponsibility. The budget fails to meet the state's legal requirement for a comprehensive annual budget, leaving critical gaps that threaten our ability to govern effectively, which is questionable. And he comes with a closing statement too, which if you want me to post the whole statement, just let me know and I can send it over. But that's basically Frank White's veto message that he delivered on January 9th, 2025. Now, before we continue to the final clip, I need to tell you guys some procedural things so we know really what's going on in the county government. Now, on January 8th, 2025, the Jackson County Legislature had their chair and vice chair elections. And so in 2024, our chair was Jeannie Laurel and our vice chair was Megan Marshall. And for 2025, they elected a new chair, which is Deron McGee, and the vice chair, which is Donna Payton. The chair is given a lot of powers. One of the more important powers is appointing the leads on the other committees, but also they have the ability to call forth ordinances, and they lead and conduct the legislative meetings. So this is a very powerful seat. So our new chair and vice chair is Deron McGee and Donna Payton. Now so the next day, that's when Frank White vetoes the entire budget. So now we go to January 22nd, 2025. This is when the chair appointments was released to the public. And for a surprise to a lot of us, because a lot of people thought Manny was going to be chair, Charlie Franklin is made budget chair, okay? Which is a huge deal. And we get to January 27th, 2025, which is the Jackson County legislators votes to table the veto. And and we're going to get into this because I have this whole clip prepared right now to go over this, because what happens to me in this situation, there were some aspects of this that was illegal, in my opinion, if it went through, but it didn't. But just as a summary as to what happened on January 27th, 2025, that was the first time the legislature actually met to discuss Frank White's veto. And this was because even though Frank White's veto was given to the legislature on January 9th, the legislature basically didn't, the chair, who's Deron McGee, didn't have a meeting or schedule a meeting until the 27th. So if you're doing quick math, that's nearly 20 days the legislature had in order to review Frank White's veto. Now, as a summarization as to what happened in this meeting, Manny Abarca, our Jackson County legislator, he basically tries to strike the component or the acknowledgement of the veto from the agenda, which would be a violation of Sunshine Law, and we'll get into that. And the reason why they're doing this is they want to try to convince the legislature and the county counselor's office that, we passed the budget through the legislature on December 30th, 2024. And because we passed it on December 30th, 2024, Frank White was obligated to issue his veto that day. He didn't have the 10 days that's usually given to him via the county ordinances because of the statutes, right? So you can't do anything, or so this veto that Frank White did was illegal, and that's why we want to remove any acknowledgement of this veto from the record, which would be a violation of Sunshine Laws, which we'll get into. Okay, I just have to tell to my audience is that this argument is really, in my opinion, is a terrible argument. I wish that they were able to, and when I say they, the people who support this argument, which was Deron McGee, Sean Smith, Manny Abarca, and Vanessa Husky, they had enough time to ask legal counsel about this. But instead of asking legal counsel or even asking a judge about their interpretation of these codes, ordinances, of the charter, they literally come up with this scheme to say, hey, Frank White can't veto this budget because of our own interpretation of these budget laws, this budget that we purposely passed, and this is where the bad faith comes in, on December 30th, 2024, so that Frank White wouldn't have the opportunity to veto this, because in our mind, his clock to veto this, instead of it being 10 days, is really 1 day. But as we'll see in this entire, and I have this here, and it's long. I mean, when I say it's long, it's 45 minutes long. The reason why I kept it in here is because I feel like the average person who's not watching these meetings, they need to watch this entire section in order to grasp the gravity of what these legislators are trying to do right now, and also to understand objectively this entire situation, which I'm going to break it down to you with the actual laws that they're pulling and give you my interpretation of that. But we're going to start this video, and I'm just telling you, it's 45 minutes long, but I think it's worthwhile. And so let's start.
So what's your motion, Legislator Barker?
That we strike the component of acknowledgement of the veto.
So right now we heard Manny Abarca basically states that he wants to strike the acknowledgement of the component of the veto, meaning what he's trying to do right now is to take the agenda and remove any mention of Frank White's veto message from the agenda, which would be a violation of the Sunshine Laws. And hold on a second, I'm going to get into this right now. So the Sunshine Laws is, basically the Sunshine Laws is a set of Missouri statutes that were passed in order to basically state that when you're in a public capacity, or when you're a public official and you're in government, all the documents have to remain public in the majority of instances, especially if those documents are funded by taxpayer money. Meaning, anything that a person does in government that's funded by taxpayer money, the government has a duty and obligation to make that record public. The unadulterated version, so a version that's not manipulated or changed or tampered with, public to the people as to what it was, right? And so what Manny is essentially trying to do is trying to remove any mention of the veto from the agenda to give the appearance that the veto never happened, right? And the reason why this would violate the Sunshine Laws is because, in accordance to Missouri Statute 610.020, it states, all public governmental bodies shall give notice of the time, date, and place of meeting and its tentative agenda in a manner reasonably calculated to advise the public of the matters to be considered, okay? Then next, we go to 610.23, which is records of governmental bodies in care of custodian duties. Records may be copied but not removed. Exception, procedure, blah blah blah. The point I really want to point out to you is in section 2, where it states, no person shall remove original public records from the office of a public governmental body or its custodian without written permission of the designated custodian. This is basically the part in the Sunshine Law where you cannot manipulate an original government document, which is what Manny's trying to do right now. And furthermore, if we look at Missouri Statute 575.110, and this is a criminal statute, right? In my opinion, what Manny's trying to do right now is literally commit a class A misdemeanor. And it basically states a person who commits the offense of tampering with a public record, if with the purpose to impair the veridity, the truthfulness, legibility, or availability of a public record, he or she knowingly makes a false entry in or falsely alters any public record, or knowingly he or she lacks the authority to do so, destroys, suppresses, or conceals any public record. And finally, the offense of tampering with a public record is a Class A misdemeanor. The agenda is a public record. What they're trying to do would be a straight violation of this statute. But let's continue. Let's start this video.
Second that.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion about the motion?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
under what premise is that being proposed?
Legislator Barker.
Happy to answer. So, the timing of this veto is not timely within state law. State law requires us to adopt a budget no later than the 31st. So, rightfully so, the veto would have had to come before the 31st. Equally as such, the county charter only allows the executive to veto a line item, not the entirety of it. Therefore, the action of vetoing the entire budget itself is not compliant to our own county code. So, therefore, I don't think that it's appropriate for us to allow on record an inaccuracy of such magnitude, and that we take whatever steps necessary to rectify the amended 2025 budget that should be within our processes now.
Can I ask for counsel
Yes,
to
go ahead.
respond?
Yes, thank you, Legislator Blauer. This was inquired of me a while ago, or a couple of weeks ago, I can't remember. I mean, the county ordinances can be vetoed by the county executive. There's no stipulations on that. The idea that they can line item vetoes on fiscal notes is in there. It's a complement to the ability to veto. So I'm not aware of what statute that Legislator Barker is referring to. But our charter specifically says that he has that authority to do so. And it's Article 2, Section 12.
Mr. Chair? Yes. Perhaps, I don't know if our auditor would like to make any statements.
So right now, basically Manny's making the argument that we need to strike any mention of the veto because County Executive Frank White wasn't able to veto the budget using his line item veto, which is crazy. Let me bring up the charter section that Brian Konvinsky is referring to. So this is section 12, which gives the county executive the right to veto. And I'm just going to read the highlighted versions. It states, if the county executive approves the county ordinance, he or she shall sign it, and the county ordinance shall thereupon be deemed enacted. But if not, the county executive shall return it with his or her objections to the county legislature, which shall enter the objections on its journal and proceed to reconsider it, which is what the agenda was, okay? After such reconsideration, 2/3 of the member of the county legislature may pass the county ordinance over the objection of the county executive, okay? So this is basically the county executive's veto power. It states that after the county legislature passes an ordinance, it's then given to the county executive to decide whether or not they want to pass this ordinance. If the county executive objects, and this is for a general ordinance, if the county executive decides to object to the general ordinance, the whole ordinance is sent back to the legislature, and they then have to get 2/3 vote in order to overturn the veto. But if they're unable to overturn the veto, then the county executive's veto upholds, and that ordinance essentially is not passed, okay? Now, when it comes to the line item veto, so a line item veto basically means that a person could take out certain provisions of a document or veto, say, I object to specifically this sentence, okay? And in our Jackson County charter, that specific power is only given to appropriations, okay? If it's not a document dealing with appropriations, when a county executive has an objection to the ordinance, the entire ordinance is vetoed. But when it comes to appropriations, the county executive can choose to either veto the entire ordinance or line item veto specific sections of that ordinance. And this is important to note because there's going to be a lot of confusion to this, because some of the legislators think that the line item veto only means that you can take out certain sections. But let's read this paragraph, which is the second paragraph that I highlighted. It states, in the case of county ordinances appropriating money, the county executive may object to one or more items or portion of items while approving other portions, in which case the approved items or portions shall take effect, and the items or portions objected to shall be reconsidered separately, okay? So this language of one or more items basically means the county executive, he can veto one line of an appropriate of a budget ordinance, or he can veto the entire thing. But what some of the legislators interpret this as is that takes away his power to veto the entire ordinance, which is completely wrong, because in the language it says one or more. It doesn't put a qualifier on it. It doesn't say 1 or 12, or you have to pass certain things in that budget, in that budget or that appropriation ordinance. It states one or more, meaning that you can choose to strike out certain provisions, or you can strike out the entire thing. But let's continue.
As well.
You need to use your mic.
I have,
I'm sorry, like I can't hear this either because they're not using their mic.
it's, yeah, I hit it once. I would prefer to respond with my response.
Note, the person who's speaking here is Q. Troy Thomas. And for people who are unaware of who Q. Troy Thomas is so, sorry, this is taking me back. Q. Troy Thomas right now is our current legislative auditor. Before he was our legislative auditor, he worked in the Jackson County, he worked under Frank, in the finance department in the Jackson County government, and he was one of the people that was responsible for the $100 million accounting error that happened in Jackson County, that was discovered in Jackson County in around 2019, like whenever Nicole Galloway put forth her auditor's report. And due to this, Q. Troy Thomas was fired, okay, because of the $100 million error, okay? A lot of people thought that was the end of his story, but our current legislature decided, you know what? Out of all the available CPAs to become the legislative auditor, I want this guy. I want Q. Troy Thomas to be our legislative auditor, even though he made this $100 million mistake. And this is the person who's speaking right now as to why, legally, why County Executive Frank White's veto was improper. I'm saying this because Q. Troy Thomas is not an attorney, okay? He does not, and we're going to go over this, he does not understand the statutes or the codes that go over that define the budget, okay? And despite this, despite the fact that he's not an attorney, despite the fact that he committed he was one of the people that were a part of the $100 million error, sections of the legislature 100% believe in his words, okay? And this is a huge problem because, in my opinion, Q. Troy Thomas should not be the legislative auditor. He should not be in any position in government overseeing our financial funds. But this is my opinion alone, but this is who they're relying on, his legal interpretation of the codes and statutes in order to convince Brian Convincey and the county councilors department that their legal interpretation is wrong. Let's continue.
Directly to the question that he raised as to what statutes of county laws governs this process.
Just to add further, because I forgot to mention, the budget was amended on December 31st. There also is no provisions in Section 12 of the charter of a time frame other than the 10 days that the county executive can then veto the amendments. So that time frame does move into the next year and budget year as well, and that's what's happened in this case.
So the state law, though, is pretty clear about when we got to adopt a budget.
That's correct. But at this point, we're sitting here with an appropriations of operations and maintenance, and I think our own code makes provisions for also salaries to move forward as well. So you go back to the preceding year if the budget wasn't passed on the time frame listed in the statutes.
Yeah, I think there's.
So what Brian Convincey is explaining is that at this moment, so when the legislature passed the proposed 2025 budget on December 31st, 2024, that wasn't enacted because the county executive, Frank White, never signed it into law, okay? And therefore, in accordance with our codes, with our statutes, and with our charter, instead of the budget that the legislature passed on December 31st becoming our budget, it reverted back to our last year's budget for operational and maintenance expenses. Let's continue.
The disagreement there, but
I'm welcome to listen to any of your attorneys that you have that are working on it.
well, I wish we had an attorney for the legislature that would be working on our behalf, because I agree. But again, I think the motion still stands. The state law's supremacy over.
And I actually agree with Manny on this. I wish that the legislature was given legal representation, because I think a lot of these issues would be resolved if you had a very hard-line attorney there that would tell these legislators that their interpretation is incorrect and that they can trust and they can believe in, because these issues that the legislature is having are completely avoidable if they actually trust the sources that are telling them the truth. You know, it's like I understand you don't like Kavinsky. You think that what he's saying is incorrect, but you know, besides the property tax assessment stuff, when it came to the budget, when it came to the ARPA discussion, Kavinsky generally, like I also agreed with his legal opinions on that matter. So let's continue.
Our own codes of conduct here when it comes to those ordinances. So the state law is very clear.
There is no state law on the budget law that says that, and so it says you go back to the preceding year, which is what I said before. And right now we're working on operations and maintenance from the 2024 budget, which includes salaries as well. So we don't.
Yeah, that's one thing that Manny really doesn't understand well enough is how rigid the legal system is, and how when you're reading statutes, you really have to take what a statute say as that is what the law is, and you cannot really wiggle out of it unless you're, in some cases, a brilliant attorney. But at the end of the day, what the law says is the law, and if you don't follow, I mean, if you don't, you can't say, I don't believe that this law says this thing, because you never really read the statute and you don't understand the statute. That doesn't mean that the statute doesn't exist and that the statute says something completely different. But let's continue.
Have a budget, but we do have operations and maintenance at this time.
The legislature adopted a budget, an amended budget.
And furthermore, the state law and county code both state that the legislature is required to adopt the budget only before December the 31st of the preceding year. Okay? Only before December the 31st. The legislature adopted the budget December the 31st of 2024. And the only way the county executive can veto the budget is if he turned around right after the legislature adopts the budget on that day and vetoes it. No, the ordinance clearly states that the legislature has that authority. And now subsequent to that, the county executive has 10 days, provided the legislature amends the budget, to exercise its line item veto.
So here, I'm going to pull this up for you guys. So right here, this is what Q. Troy Thomas is referring to. It's this is Jackson County Ordinance number 530.1 and .2. Okay, and it basically states, and I'm reading the highlighted sections. Appropriation ordinances based on the recommended budget with modifications as the county legislature considers advisable shall be enacted not later than the 31st day of December following the submission of the recommended budget. It follows in the next section, if the appropriation ordinances are not acted upon on or before the date set forth in section 530.1, the several amounts last appropriated for each office, department, or agency so far as they relate to salary shall be deemed to be reappropriated by ordinances for the same purposes for the ensuing year. In Q. Troy Thomas's mind, which I'm just kind of thinking to myself, did he ever watch the cartoon with the bill on Capitol Hill? Because this is basically what it this is basically the same situation as a bill on Capitol Hill. On Q. Troy Thomas's mind, he thinks that the proposed budget that was passed through the Jackson County Legislature but not signed into law by County Executive Frank White was forcibly passed because of this section, right? But the thing is, let me just trying to get like a little prop out here, you know. So on December 31st, 2024, all the the amended budget for 2025, all it was a piece of paper, okay? Yes, it was passed by the legislature, but it wouldn't be enacted into law until either the county executive signs it into law, or two, if the county executive vetoes the ordinance or line item vetoes the ordinance, they would have to override the county executive's veto in order for it to be put into law, okay? Until that happens, it's just a piece of paper. It's nothing more, nothing less. It's just a document. It's not our law. But Q Troy Thomas's interpretation is incorrect. He's using a section saying that A, if the Jackson County Legislature passes something, it doesn't matter if the county executive approves or denies it if it's on or before the 31st. And this is where my opinion that the hearings that happened before were in bad faith, because they, in my opinion, they purposefully delayed this budget passage until the very last day in order to argue this awful argument, basically stating that since County Executive Frank White didn't veto it on December 31st, the same day that it passed, that our recommended budget is going to be passed unilaterally through. But that is not what this section says. And we're going to even get into the state laws. It's not what the state laws state. But because of their misinterpretation of these ordinances and of these statutes, it's led to this situation right now where we don't have a budget because these 5 legislators wanted to, and it's selfish. They wanted to pass their own budget through without relying on the cooperation of others, which to me is negligent. But let's continue.
Authority. He cannot veto even a budget amendment which represents the legislature's power to increase or decrease the budget as it sees fit.
This is a lot. This is not true.
He has 10 days to do so, and he cannot do it in its entirety or in whole. And furthermore, why would the county executive veto the entire budget, the whole budget, when the budget that he recommends would represent the whole, in addition to the amendments? That defies logic. Okay.
Defies logic.
The county executive failed to exercise his line item veto authority when he did not go through and veto each line that was part of the budget amendment.
One or more
As a
items.
result, it would seem that the budget, as amended by the county legislature on December 31st, 2024, is the legal budget that
It
needs to be uploaded today. And they cannot go back to
It doesn't state that.
2024 budget because it's not allowed or permissible by law, state or county.
Point of information, Mr.
It is permissible. And this is how crazy what he says is because when we go back to the specific ordinance that he cited, right, giving him this legal authority, the 530.2 specifically states if the appropriation ordinances are not acted upon, meaning that there is no budget, there's no budget that actually passed, on or before the date set forth in section 530.1, which is December 31st, the several amounts last appropriated for each office, department, or agency shall be deemed to be reappropriated by ordinances for the same purposes for the ensuing fiscal year. So that means it reverts to the prior budget, meaning that is what currently happened is since no budget was passed on that date, we are operating on the 2024 budget. So Q Troy Thomas's analysis is completely and utterly incorrect. But let's just continue.
Chair.
Yes. Legislator Marshall.
For county council, the budget is presented in form of an ordinance, correct?
That's correct.
So when the legislature adopts an ordinance, what action takes place to actually put that ordinance into law?
And right here, I'm going to commend Megan Marshall. she's asking these questions not because she doesn't know the answers to them. She's asking these questions for Brian Convincey to clearly tell and explain the process of when an ordinance is actually made to law to the other legislators, so that they know that what Q. Troy Thomas is saying right now is utterly incorrect.
You mean the adoption is that there's 10 days then for the administration, for the county executive to accept the ordinance in the way that it was voted on by the legislature.
So the ordinance does not become law or is not enacted on until the administration does their part, or is the ordinance in effect therefore law when the legislature makes their vote?
If the county executive expresses his support for it, then obviously it can go into effect at that time and they present it back to the clerk's office. But in this case, they had a 10-day time frame in our charter, and that's when they returned it within that time frame, and they vetoed it, the entire ordinance.
So one
The
can't
budget.
happen without the other. Is that
That's
what you're
correct.
saying?
It's a two-step process. That's correct.
Thank you.
Point of information, except for budgetary processes.
It
That is not a normal ordinance process, because in our charter defines the budgetary process very specifically, and it includes what is eligible to be vetoed.
Mr. Chairman.
The charter doesn't say anything about the budget being unable to be vetoed in there. It says it specifically in the charter.
Does
It says
Does
ordinances
it explicitly
can be
give that
vetoed.
authority on the
It gives
budget?
him explicit power
On the
to
budget,
veto.
not an
On
ordinance.
ordinances, which is what the budget is.
No, the
It's a
budget
budget
is an
ordinance.
ordinance by virtue of introduction, but it is different than every other ordinance that would otherwise create county law.
Legislator Barker, are you going to introduce a resolution while you bicker up here? There are thousands of Kansas citizens who are waiting for better buses now. We cannot wait
Keep order.
to have better buses right now. Bus riders deserve more. We need
Ma'am.
Okay, let me explain what's happening here. So basically, well, I want to say first, everything that Manny Abarca was saying was incorrect. If we go back to what it actually states in the charter, it states here specifically when it comes to appropriating money, again, in the case of county ordinances appropriating money, the county executive may object to one or more items. It does not this section does not preclude the county executive from vetoing the entire ordinance. It just basically states that for ordinances specifically about appropriation, the county executive can actually go into that ordinance and veto specific things. He can't do that. He or she cannot do that for other bills that don't deal with appropriation. Okay, that's the whole difference between a line item veto power and an ultimate veto power. Okay, now what is currently going on in this clip with the lady who got up and is yelling at Manny about the buses is that there's an organization called the Sunrise Movement, which has been advocating for governmental agencies to continue the zero fare system in Kansas City. So right now in Kansas City, our bus fares are generally free, but that's kind of destroying. It's one of the factors as to why our bus system right now is deteriorating, because we don't have any good source of funding to continuing allowing these zero fare systems. Not only that, but the other cities within the county like Grandview, Independence, Blue Springs, they cut their contracts recently with the KCATA. I mean, not Blue Springs, but, Raytown, Grandview, and Independence. They cut their contracts with the KCATA so that now there's no bus lines that will actually go out there anymore. And furthermore, I read an article saying Johnson County is going to also eventually go away from the KCATA because they want to create their own system. And so a lot of bus drivers are actually going to lose their jobs. They're going to be laid off. And our bus lines are going to be continually reduced until we actually increase funding to our bus system. I sympathize with the people in the Sunrise Movement because I too believe that the bus system and public transportation in general is very critical for a healthy county. Our constituents shouldn't have to rely on a vehicle in order to get to their job in this day and age. Like, we have the technology to ensure to ensure public transportation in Jackson County, but we refuse to do so because our locally elected officials do not think it's one of the biggest issues, and that's just the problem. That's just how I view the issue as a whole. But the reason why they're here is, in my opinion, I think it was based on a misunderstanding. And when I say misunderstanding, I'm putting it very nicely. I think that there were some people that reached out to Sunrise and gave them promises that other people would know that they would not be able to keep. And this is what led to this whole situation boiling over, right? And essentially the Sunrise Movement wants the Jackson County government to use some of its ARPA fund money in order to help the KCATA continue their zero fare policy. But I mean, that's the likelihood of that passing would be extremely low due to the amount of funds. In my opinion, the best way for the Sunrise Movement to try to get what they want would be to go through the city level, because the city's budget is around 3 times larger than the county budget is, and they're more responsible for the health and continuation of the KCATA than the Jackson County government is. The Jackson County government only has one person on the KCATA board, while Kansas City, the city of Kansas City, has 3 appointed people on the board, and they should be arguing with the city of Kansas City to put more money towards these bus lines, especially since they have more money in their budget to allocate it. And it's right now February. City of Kansas City is going to introduce and pass their budget in March. Like, they should be on the ground right now. So yeah, I think this whole situation with the Sunrise Movement is really tragic, because I think that they are here for good intentions, because our reliance on a single car system, it really puts the average person in a financial bind. And that's because if you ever go to like a country like, for instance, like Taiwan or to Switzerland, they have many modes of transportation where the average person there does not have to have a vehicle in order to go to work or to have a nice social life. And if you think about the expenses of having a vehicle, you know, you're running $1,000 to $2,000 a month just based on insurance and paying off your car payments each month just to be able to drive to work. And our society should be different to not allow that to happen. And so I say that because this is basically what's going on right now, and but it's going to continue, so I'm going to keep on playing it.
Buses now! Find buses now! Find buses now!
Find buses now! We're going to go back and resume our legislative session. We are now going to vote on the motion under unfinished business.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I was trying to make some inquiries before we were disrupted.
Oh, go ahead.
So, for the county council, is it my microphone's on? Is it fair to say that often in the law there are multiple deadlines? Like, if I take our IRS deadlines of April 15th, that's a deadline we're all familiar.
See, this is Sean Smith's explanation, trying to support Q. Troy Thomas's explanation. But the issue is that, yes, there was a deadline for December 31st, 2024, but it specifically states in that ordinance that if there's no budget that is actually enacted into law, okay, it reverts back to the 2024 budget. But let's continue.
Familiar with, and it's specified in law. And then there might also be within the Internal Revenue Code other deadlines that say if they send you an inquiry, you have a specific length of time to respond to those inquiries. Like, it's pretty common to have different types of deadlines. Is that fair to say?
Yes, there is. I will read State Statute 50.620 appropriations first and second class counties, which is the budget law of the state of Missouri. If at the termination of any fiscal year in counties of class 1 and 2, the appropriations necessary for the support of the government for the ensuing year have not been made, the several amounts appropriated in the last annual appropriation order for the objects and purposes therein specified, so far as they relate to operation and maintenance expenses, are deemed to be reappropriated for the several objects and purposes specified in the appropriation order. And until the county commission acts, the accounting officer shall authorize expenditures and draw warrants in payment thereof, and the warrants shall be countersigned and paid for the support of the government on the basis of the appropriation for the preceding fiscal year.
Yeah.
So it's listed in the state statutes that you do use last year's.
And-
And there's no, the deadline is the 31st, but when it was past that date, it does not trump the fact that our charter says he has 10 days to veto that ordinance.
Okay, so then moving to the charter, and by the way, operations and maintenance, since you mentioned it, can you, and I know that phraseology from an accounting perspective, as that's my background.
And I also want to say, put this note here too, really quickly. Oh. Now, this is also part of the budget statutes that dictate the way that county governments need to operate their budget. If we look at Section 6, it states, so this is basically the power for the county government to amend a budget, right? But it states here 6, notwithstanding, and so this is the last line, notwithstanding the provisions of this section, no charter county shall be restricted from amending its budget under and pursuant to the terms of this charter, okay? Meaning, this section basically states that the county charter supersedes this section. So if the county charter says something differently as to how they can amend their budget, this statute basically states that county charter applies, okay? And Jackson County is a charter county. And I'm going to bring up the map later on, but let's continue with this clip.
From a legal perspective, what does operations and maintenance mean?
I think that's the function of the government. I don't think there's raises. I don't think there's new county projects that can be appropriated at this point. I mean,
So in the
look at
accounting world, and it sounds like finance terms to me, but in the accounting world, it would be, keeping the gas in the cars, keeping the lights on, keeping the facilities in the same functional order that they're in, but not investing in infrastructure, not doing capital improvements. Is that kind of the same, you think?
I agree with you, yeah. No capital improvement.
Okay, good. So in the county charter, the section we're referring to, Article 2, Section 12, says in the case of county ordinances appropriating money, so just to be clear, the county budget ordinance, we are appropriating money, right? That's the intent of the appropriation or the budget ordinance. The county executive may object to one or more items or portions of items while approving the other portions, in which case the approved items or portions shall take effect. This seems to me to be a carve-out of the county executive's veto power, where it seems to be specific to appropriations ordinances, and it's saying that he can object to one or more items. It doesn't give him, in my opinion, it actually removes from him a blanket veto power.
See, this interpretation is wrong because it says one or more. There's no limit, right? So it doesn't say 1 to 25 or 1, but the county executive cannot veto the entire ordinance. And so if it doesn't preclude, then it means it includes, right? That's legal interpretation 101. And so Sean Smith's interpretation of the statute, in my opinion, is completely wrong. But this is because Sean's not an attorney, okay? He didn't take classes to really learn about statutory interpretation. And so this is him trying to understand what the law is. but it just is so frustrating because it's like, why didn't he ask an attorney? Why didn't he ask a judge? You know, like there's like how many judges in Jackson County Courthouse? Like at any time there's over 20 judges. Like he could just go down a level and ask a judge, like, hey, can you look into this and you know, or ask the judge's clerk. You know, there's many ways that you can get the help that you need in the county government. But let's continue.
Because it is specific to appropriation ordinances, and it specifically says he can only object to one or more items or portions of items, not the whole thing.
No.
So that's why I think we have kind of a disagreement here, is because we believe that vetoing the whole thing was not consistent with our own charter, and B, that there was this deadline question that the legislature acted, and in the case of this state statute you read, it referred to a county commission. I think we're the equivalent of a county commission in this case. Often state law doesn't specifically refer to a legislature. So that's why we have kind of this dispute as to whether or not the county executive has the authority to veto a budget, 98% of which, probably 99% of which, was not amended by this legislature. So it's literally, he vetoed the budget that he recommended to us, except for a very small portion that we amended. He vetoed it all in order to go back to the 2024 budget, which for other reasons I also think we've done improperly. And I don't see finance here anymore, but they uploaded the whole 24 budget, and we've spent money now against infrastructure accounts, and that's not appropriate under the interpretation he gave us. So we have some problems. That's I think the point here. So that's why we're saying
This is the thing that's just a little bit frustrating with Sean's interpretation. Just viewing this, I'm just taking this as my experiences as an attorney, is that if Sean really believed that Frank White's veto was illegal, the proper procedure would be is to have an attorney file a temporary restraining order on Frank White's veto. I mean, when I say the proper procedure, it's one of the many avenues that could have been followed, would be to file a temporary restraining order on Frank White's veto in order to have a Jackson County judge or a Clay County or a Platte County judge, if it's taken out of the Jackson County courthouse, to review, but have a judge to review the actual veto and then give their own order as to whether or not the veto legally complied with the county charter, the ordinances, and the statutes. But that didn't happen, you know? Instead of doing that, they're trying to violate sunshine laws, potentially violate a criminal statute to manipulate the agenda record to pretend that this ordinance or this veto wasn't on the agenda that day, which is completely wrong. But let's continue.
don't read the veto into the record so that we can come back at our next meeting after we've gathered some more facts and make a determination about whether or not this body.
Yeah, you see that? So that we don't read the veto into the record so that we can come back. So he's basically saying that let's try to ignore that this veto even exists so that we can regroup and talk about this later. But that's not what the law states, and they have to take this veto up right now, or else they're not going to be able to have an opportunity to override it. But let's continue.
Wants to override that veto. Mr. Yeah, for our county auditor, did I misstate anything or miss anything? Thanks.
We can't hear you.
The county council, when he the state statute 50.620, it states very clearly, if at the termination of any fiscal year in counties of classes 1 and 2, the appropriation necessary for the support of government for the ensuing year have not been made, the several amounts appropriated in the last annual appropriation order for the objects and purposes therein specified, so far as they relate to operation and maintenance expenses, are deemed to be reappropriated. The legislature did act. They adopted the budget on December 31st, of 2024. So this does not even, it's not even germane apply, does not even apply, Mr. County Council. And furthermore, we have ordinances on our books in this ordinance.
As I stated before, this is why you get attorneys. The reason why Q. Troy Thomas's analysis is incorrect is this is the ordinance that the statute that he's quoting right now is like I stated in this prior section here. It states on the bottom 6, notwithstanding the provisions of the section, no charter county shall be restricted from amending its budget pursuant to the terms of its charter, right? Meaning that whatever the charter says will supersede whatever the state statute says. But furthermore, in this one, it states, except as herein provided, the budget shall be adopted and appropriation order shall finally be made at least 10 days after beginning of the fiscal year. This is basic, like everybody is basically stating the same thing. Like, if there was a budget that was not vetoed, right, that was passed by the legislature and not vetoed, then of course that budget would be made into law, right? But in this case, the budget was vetoed. It's just, like I said before, it's just a piece of paper. It's not law yet, right? So this does not apply. And this section arguably could be argued that this section does not apply to Jackson County because Jackson County is not a Class 1 county. It's a charter county. So whatever it states in its charter is what's going to apply. But take that with a grain of salt too, because I'm not I don't specialize in governmental law, but this is just my own interpretations of reading these statutes. But let's continue.
Budget ordinance 530.1. The appropriations must be enacted, and it reads, appropriation ordinances based on the recommended budget with the modifications as the county legislature considers advisable, that is the amendment, Mr. County Councilor, shall be enacted not later than the 31st day of December following the submission of the recommended budget. The budget for the next year following the election of the county legislature, and that's the exception, in the county executive being the budget for 1975 and every fourth year thereafter shall be enacted on by the legislature.
So as I stated before, this is basically stating that if there isn't a budget enacted, so a budget that's actually put into law by December 31st, as it states in the section 530.2, last year's budget will apply. Like, he's basically stating the same thing as the county councilor, except his interpretation of this statute is wholly wrong because he thinks that a piece of paper that hasn't been enacted into law would automatically become law because of the deadline of December 31st, 2024. But that's not true. It only, that deadline only states that if we don't have a enacted budget by that time, so a budget that is either approved by the county executive, or approved by the legislature and the county executive, or the county legislature supersedes the veto and so it becomes our actual budget via the law. If we don't have one or the other, then we just revert back to last year's budget, which is where we are in this current situation right now. Q. Troy Thomas just doesn't understand what this code is saying, and he misrepresented this code's meaning to these legislators who took his word, like they believed him even though he's not an attorney, and I'm assuming they didn't even try to ask a judge for their own interpretation, or ask a court clerk, or ask a county councilor for their own interpretation. But I don't know. But that's the impression that I'm getting from this whole conversation.
Later than January 31st. But it has the 530.2, sections 530.2 says, failure to enact appropriations. If the appropriation ordinances are not acted upon, on or before the date set forth in section 530.1, which is December the 31st, the several amounts last appropriated for each office, department, or agency so far as they relate to salary shall be deemed to be reappropriated by the ordinance for the same purposes for the ensuing fiscal year. That's the difference. Our ordinance, the difference between our ordinance in the state statute 50.620 is the operations and maintenance. One refers specifically to operations and maintenance. Ours refers specifically to salaries. I'll take issues that it also utilities need to be included. And furthermore, if you read chapter 50.6 section 50.610 RSMO, it states, except as herein provided, the budget shall be adopted in the appropriation order finally made at least 10 days after the beginning of the fiscal.
Remember, except as herein provided, right? We're going back to this one. Notwithstanding the provisions of the section, no county charter shall be restricted from amending its budget under and pursuant to the terms of this charter. Okay? So it's just like this is Hugh Troy Thomas is not an attorney. Don't believe his words because he's not an attorney. But let's continue. Like he does auditing. He's not an attorney, okay? Like talk to the attorneys about law, talk to the judges about law, talk to the court clerks about law, because it would save you a lot of headache over this.
Fiscal year, period. So, what budget should be uploaded is the budget that was amended and adopted on December 31st by the legislature.
10 days after?
It says 10 days. It gives you 10 days to veto. That's consistent with the charter, okay? Yeah, that's consistent with the charter. Yes.
What?
Mr. Chair, if I could make one more point.
Yes, go ahead.
So,
Kavinsky
for
is
members
so
of the legislature,
puzzled right
what
now.
we're talking about right now is whether or not to remove the veto message from our agenda for today for possible future consideration.
Violation
What I
of
have
sunshine
in front of me that I will pass out when we get to new business is a resolution that essentially is addressing these concerns where we have inconsistency between what some members of the legislature believe and what the administration believes. And this resolution is asking for an unbiased opinion from our state auditor. If we pass this resolution, state auditor gives us an opinion, and then we can address this veto at a later point in time. That's
So this is actually kind of nutty to me. Instead of being like, hey, why don't we talk to a judge about this? Why don't we talk to a retired judge about this? Why don't we hire a mediator who has a legal background to discuss this and mediate this entire situation? Sean just wants the state auditor to basically have the final authority over this whole entire situation. The Republican state auditor over a body that's primarily Democratic is, of course, going to be completely unbiased, right? And that just shows you the lack of trust in this body. But let's continue.
That's kind of where this is going. So I'm just
Point of
letting you know, for
information.
purposes of deciding on this motion, that there's this next step where I'm asking the state auditor for an opinion, because I think that what we've been informed that this veto message of a complete veto of the entire budget, which by the way has not happened in Jackson County history since we were incorporated as a charter county. It's always been line item vetoes by the executive, consistent with Article 2, Section 12. So I'm simply saying we can buy ourselves some time and get an opinion from a qualified, independent source. Thank you.
Mr. Kavinsky and then Legislator Marshall.
Okay, I'll just respond to Legislator Smith. That should go to the courts if that's where you think it's incorrect. But
And if our efforts to have an attorney represent the legislature had ever been successful in my term, I would be thrilled to see the courts make a determination as well. For now, this is what we have that we can do without
and just
that help.
to respond to the statement on Article 2, Section 12, in the case of county ordinances appropriating money, the county executive may object. Now, the key word there is may, to one or more items or portions of items. So that means he doesn't have to.
Right,
which
he could
then-
have accepted the whole
but-
thing.
So it's the
But it
entirety of
doesn't,
the ordinance.
it doesn't
Yes,
say,
it's all in the same clause. And that's why it's a complement to the initial power of vetoing an ordinance. He can also, when it's appropriating, do line items.
I agree with
That's how it's
Kavinsky's
interpreted.
interpretation
It's always
of
been
this.
interpreted that way, and there has been opinions made about this before from the county council's office, well before I was here. So
Understood. I read it, and in plain language, I believe it is restricting his authority to veto to, since he's already recommended a budget, it makes a lot of sense that he would only be able to line item veto the items that he objected to that the legislature amended, not the entire budget, which, as I said, was 99% exactly the budget he recommended. That's why I read this and think that it contemplated a more restrictive view of the veto power in this case rather than a more expansive view. So, like I said, I think it makes sense to get an independent third party to weigh in on this.
There's nothing in
Legislator
there that
Marshall.
suggests that it's
How long do you think an
restrictive.
independent third party
It's
would
only
take, Legislator
expansive.
Smith?
In this case, where it's literally a matter of having the state auditors
And this is another example of Megan Marshall. It's really interesting watching these meetings because you really get to understand people's like debate styles or how they try to convince people of their points without being that upfront about it. Megan Marshall asks this question as to how long it will take because her follow-up essentially is going to be like, well, if you had these feelings that Frank White's veto was illegal, that it was improper, that it wasn't following the statutes or the Jackson County Charter or the ordinances, why didn't you address this early on? Because like I stated before, the veto happened on January 9th. We're at a hearing where this is January 27th. So this nearly is 20 days after this veto occurred. Sean could have easily, if he could get an opinion by the state auditor within the week, he could have asked the state auditor a week ago to do this and have an opinion by the state auditor about this in order to amplify his argument. But he didn't do so. Well, let's continue.
simply interpret statute for us as opposed to a deep investigation, as we've seen with the assessment stuff. This seems like it's reviewing some paper that's already laid out there. I don't expect it to take long.
How long is that?
If we pass this, I'll deliver it to him tomorrow, and I'd say we might have an answer back by the end of the week with a qualified opinion.
Legislator,
So,
go ahead.
So I'll say there's been a lot of things done on this legislature that haven't been done in the history of the county in the past 2 years. The county executive's veto message was issued on January the 9th, and today's the 27th. This is 8 days later. And so I'm just curious as to
She meant to
why,
say 18.
why this inquiry wasn't started then.
We didn't have a normal legislative meeting
Well,
between.
I mean,
the 19th.
individual inquiry. I mean, as far as the due diligence that you did to gather the information, communicate with, well, I don't know who you communicate with.
So the
but-
idea that
so that
the
work.
the idea that the veto message was not lawful was just brought to my attention Friday of last week, along with citations and statutes. So I drafted this resolution asking for a qualified opinion from the state auditor.
Look, that statement is a little bit questionable to me because of the timing of the passage of the budget. Okay, like if this was on another day besides December 31st, and there wasn't a pattern of delay as shown through the legislature on discussing and trying to pass their amended budget to be decided upon by Frank White whether to veto or not, I would have a different opinion on this. But as I shown in these videos, is that there was a purpose. I think the delay was by design in order to pass this on December 31st, because they were going to use this argument to ensure that their budget is passed without Frank White's veto taking effect.
At that point in time.
Make that clear. But I'm just saying we've had time to review the county executive's veto message as individual legislators and to start doing our due diligence if we didn't agree with it as far as talking to one another and how we want to approach addressing his veto measures like we have normally done in the past, in the past 2 years with other vetoes. And I think to delay it, as far as how normal practice has been, is just another precedence that we should be very careful about setting when a lot of this work can be done in between meetings. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Legislator Franklin.
Yeah, I'm not clear as to why we would be using the state auditor to give this opinion.
It was the idea that I had.
And I want to say the only person who's actually an attorney in the legislature right now is Charlie Franklin.
Simply as somebody that's unbiased, is familiar with state statutes, they have attorneys and
Could
financial
we
people.
find somebody else that might be unbiased and go with that, or?
It's an option. Once I present the resolution in new business, I'd be
Is
happy to
everybody
entertain
gonna
an
be
amendment.
happy with the opinion of the auditor or somebody else we find is unbiased, or, you know, we could find people that are unbiased to give an opinion, but that doesn't seem like it means a whole lot. Particularly the state auditor.
Yeah, that's Charlie Franklin basically saying in his own way that this is just a diversion. No matter what the auditor says, no matter who says, we can even get a judge involved, it's not going to change your mind. But let's continue.
Legislator Lauer.
Yes, I'd like to just go back to the motion that was made and clarify that we're asking for a journal entry to be made in regards to the veto message. What specifically are we asking? Sorry. What specifically are we asking to be changed in the journal?
The agenda.
To make, so that the integrity of the veto message is not changed.
I mean, I think, to whom you want to answer?
This is going to the Sunshine Law
Whoever can
violation,
answer that.
potential violation.
I would say that the reality that there are many of us who don't believe the veto is legal in itself, why we would accept a veto message is questionable. And I think the striking of it denoting an unfinished business that it is a veto message from the county executive and it being qualified as accepted in the journal creates a new barrier or burden if we do deem, in fact, that it is illegal in the process of veto.
Then
So,
we would not have accepted the journal.
okay, well, that's why we're amending the journal.
Because by changing the wording in the journal, it would appear to me that you're messing with the integrity of the veto message. And the veto message is what came from the county executive. And that's a legitimate document that we all received a copy of.
Right. We also all have access to the state constitution where these sections are defined. So the reality that it's accepted or not is what we're talking about here. Accepting the reality that a budget that we believe was unlawfully rejected, I mean, the same premise exists there. So I think we're arguing semantics here.
You're not arguing.
It seems to me that if you don't agree with the veto message, then you would not approve of it being, with the veto message itself. What's in the journal is an accurate reflection of what occurred at the meeting. And that was the veto message from the county executive. And that should be included, in my opinion. And so if we're debating the actual veto message, that's a separate, distinct thing from changing the journal.
Jeannie Laurel in this instance is 100% correct. It's like if you have something against Frank White's veto, then let's debate the veto and let's vote on whether or not to uphold the veto. But for you to try to remove this from the record is going to violate a lot of laws, including the Sunshine Laws and including this law that I put on this screen temporarily right here, which is a criminal law, 575.110, which is tampering with a public record, which you cannot do as a public official or as a private individual.
Mr. Chair, if I could.
Yes.
I think that's all well and good, but I think there's also some other challenges here, like there is no budget officer currently. A budget officer has not been duly named. So that would relate that back to the county executive. The county executive is not here. Thus, him presenting his veto message to us via email isn't defined within the county code or ordinance either. So we can play that game all we want, but the reality is there are several of us, and we'll see how many that is, that believe this budget was illegally vetoed, period.
Legislator Anderson?
To inquire, which one are we voting on right now? And because Legislator Smith mentioned something else, so I don't know which one. Is it one and one, or is it separate? What are we doing?
So I believe the motion is to strike the budget veto from the agenda.
From the
And then-
agenda.
And then there
Right.
might be something else?
Correct.
Is that right?
According
Yes.
to, yes.
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to be clear on what we're doing.
It is confusing. I agree with you,
Madam Clerk, go
Jalen. It is confusing.
Just real quick, the budget message is uploaded in Granicus. It's not gonna change anything with the budget message is as it stands. I think, and correct me if, the way I'm understanding the motion, because I need to know to do it, is you just want this wording not under unfinished business, is that,
Manny.
That's correct.
okay.
So,
Because the message is as stands, it doesn't change.
so,
Which it should be because of the sunshine law.
And
they-
it's
they
already
can't-
there, yeah.
They'd be violating it if they're changing something that's already been submitted. But
so, to inquire.
Yes, go ahead.
So if we're, how can we have an objective review and then amend the journal?
I don't,
What, if this, then what?
do you mean the journal?
What's
or the
next?
agenda?
Just so we can have a clear understanding of what, I don't know who to ask the question to, but if we're wanting an objective review, why are we wanting to amend the journal?
I think the goal here is to not recognize the veto. So in
There
whatever
you
method
go.
possible.
There's
I
Manny.
don't think that's what the
The goal here is to not recognize the veto, right? The goal here is to not recognize the veto actually exists, which is a violation of the sunshine laws. And if they actually, and luckily they failed in this vote to try to strike it from the record, but if they did, it might have triggered this section here of tampering with a public record, because it technically would be tampering with the public record if they came back and said, oh, Frank White actually didn't put this on the agenda, we didn't even have to recognize it in time, you know? So this is very dangerous behavior that's happening right now in the legislature, and that's why I'm playing this whole clip to my audience in whole, just so that they can actually realize just how dangerous this is. Well, let's continue.
clerk is saying that. Madam Clerk,
Right,
could you
she's
repeat
talking
what
about
you
more of a
just said?
technical.
Could you repeat what you just said?
I mean, the budget message is the budget message, like, we can't change
You
that.
can't change it, right?
What I understand is you just want the sentence taken off under unfinished business.
But it's still there. Is that what you're saying, Madam Clerk?
What sentence?
This
Right here.
that says budget veto message from the county executive received January 9th, 2025.
That doesn't make the veto message go away.
It's,
So-
it's,
So
It's
wouldn't it
already
be, I guess maybe Mr. Chair, this question for you, or, so if there's a member of this body who don't agree with the budget, the veto of the budget, then wouldn't we just vote to either overturn the budget or stay the budget? If you don't agree with the veto message, then wouldn't that be what you do?
Yes.
Counselor's position is yes.
And
You
can I
put it in
respond,
for
Mr. Chair?
veto override.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, so, when we're in a position where we're up against a deadline, as we are in the case of a veto message, where it has to be overridden, I believe, at our next regular meeting, which this is, and we feel like we want more information, in my opinion, an outside opinion about whether or not the veto message was proper and what the proper budget is to be operating off of at this point. I think that the idea of striking this from the agenda similar to when we had a special meeting of the legislature just to go into closed session after the veto message. But this wasn't on the agenda. The idea or thought process is then perhaps we still have the opportunity to look at a veto message and consider an override after we've gotten more information from the state auditor. So
This is nuts. I mean, they're basically stating clearly what their intentions were is we need more time to come up with a strategy to overturn Frank White's veto because we don't have the votes right now. And honestly, with what the county councilor is saying, maybe it's making sense, maybe it's resonating amongst some of the members of the legislature, but right now, this, in my opinion, is obstructionism, because right now the legislature is supposed to be considering Frank White's veto message and supposed to be debating right now as to whether or not to uphold the veto. But essentially what they want to do is to ignore the veto to give themselves more time to come up with a response to Frank White's veto message, even though they had 18 days in order to do so. But the way that they're trying to do it is through illegal means. And when I say illegal, I mean it would violate the Sunshine Laws, and it would also violate potentially violate a criminal statute. But let's continue.
if people don't think that's a good strategy, that's okay. We're dealing with some fairly unusual circumstances, in my opinion, and we're trying to find the best way forward that we can. And right now we're struggling. So.
Legislator Payton and Legislator Franklin.
Oh, thank you so much. Why is this on the agenda under unfinished business? Perhaps if I
Donna
understood the
Payton is our
intention
vice
of it being
chair.
on
She's been
there
our
under
vice chair for
unfinished
2
business.
years, and this is her question.
Because since the last meeting, I received this, and so it goes on to the next agenda under unfinished business.
So vetoes always appear. Excuse me, under unfinished business. And with it being, excuse me, under unfinished business, it dictates we take some type of action.
Yes.
The rules also state that if you're going to override a veto, you have to do it at the next proceeding event, which is today's
Yes.
meeting.
Okay.
Legislator Franklin.
Under this scenario, doesn't that mean that anytime the chief executive vetoed anything, we could say we don't want it on the agenda, so we're gonna kick it off?
Franklin is putting this into plain language as to how dangerous this is.
And we could come up with some reason anytime and say, we're just not voting on this veto
How it's a slippery slope.
with a 5-4 instead of the 6 that it would normally take.
Yeah, so what Charlie Franklin is basically stating that you're basically taking away the by using this means that is probably violating the Sunshine Laws and is probably violating that criminal statute that I pointed out. To do this would be basically taking away the county executive's power to not only to veto ordinances that he or she deems to be against, what their policies are, but also it would take away the power of the legislators who also believe in the county executive's position, but they only have they're in a 4 minority, so it would be stripping their power away too, and that's how dangerous this is. But let's continue.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Thank you, sir. Because this was on the agenda, council or clerk, I don't know, we'll bring in both of them. Hopefully, because this has been on the agenda and that it's in Granicus, we've received the letter, those different types of things. And we're moving to take it off of the journal.
The agenda.
What?
Agenda.
I'm sorry. We'll get there. Off of the agenda. Does that mean because this is where I think we're heading to the murkiness of this. Just because we remove something from the agenda, even though we have received it, does this mean that this is the meeting of which you still had to veto it and you did nothing? Or does this mean that it just is, I mean, because what I'm kind of understanding here is we're erasing that sentence and saying, oh, we don't want this on the agenda. But if the agenda went out, it's already on there, now the legislature is going to make a decision to say, no, we don't want this on the agenda. That doesn't mean it was, I'm very confused here, because it's not, I don't know how you walk this in the sense of that we don't want it on here, and if we get rid of it, we don't have to deal with it. But I don't know if that's what that does, since it's already been put on the agenda. And since the clerk's already received it, and we've all received it as a legislature, I'm confused. Does that make any sense? Am I making sense here?
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't, I'm trying to understand.
Yes. But from the councilor's perspective, this is the opportunity to override the veto that the county executive did to the budget ordinance. And it says the next proceeding meeting, so it doesn't matter if you try to violate sunshine and wipe it off the journal at this point, because it's there, it was already done, it's the next proceeding meeting.
I think that helped me a little bit, but
I'm
here we
sorry.
are.
I
No,
don't know
I'm
what
with
else
you.
to
No,
say.
no, it's not. No, I don't expect, because I don't understand it either, because again, if it's already in the system and we've received it and this is how this has been, I don't know, by saying, well, it's not on there now, does that make it that, oh, you know, we get another chance to talk about the veto at another time? That's my question.
Yeah, and Jalen's position that this is hard for him to understand is actually very normal, because the fact is that Jalen is not an attorney. Like, he has been a legislator on for many years, but these are the theories that Q. Troy Thomas tried to pull against the county councilor and the Jackson County government are seeped in ordinance and statute and charter interpretation. And so you have to have a pretty good hold on statute interpretation and know how these statutes work together in order to really understand what's going on and how severe how severe or how terrible it would be if Q. Troy Thomas and these other legislators had this way, because it would essentially make the county executive's veto worthless, and it would also make the voices of the four legislators also worthless as well. It would strip away their powers and the power of the veto, which would be a complete violation of the charter. It would be a complete violation of the sunshine laws, because they're trying to manipulate what the record is. And as I stated before, it would also potentially violate a criminal statute, because they would be tampering with the public record. But let's continue.
Anyway, I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
All right, Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
This is to remove it from the agenda,
Yes.
Yeah, so this is to violate the sunshine
and
laws.
that would be a violation of sunshine law. Is that correct?
I believe it would be, yes.
To amend the agenda?
Yes, to take out what the county executive proposed to the county clerk, yes. I feel confident with that.
Let's see who votes for it.
Question, can I ask one question? If it stays on the agenda, does that mean that there has to be a vote today? Can it be held pending whatever review?
The practice has been, and it's listed as the next proceeding meeting, to do a veto override. And that's this meeting. And there's no information that would say you can extend that beyond that.
And I understand that that is what has been the custom, but because we do not have legal representation as a legislature, and because we do have questions and concerns that our auditor has indicated are very legitimate concerns, I think if we don't have a complete picture, how can we possibly vote? If there is a statute or a part of the charter that differs from your legal opinion, then we should do our due diligence as well, because yes, this is our first regular meeting. Yes, we need a budget, but yes, we need to do it proper and in order. And a legal opinion, and I trust that you believe that your opinion is correct, but we've had instances where we differ, where we have found out that the difference wasn't all, and I can name at least one instance, if you'd like, but I don't.
See, Donna's just trying to get away from the argument right now. I agree with Donna that the legislature should have independent legal counsel. However, I question whether or not they actually did go to the county counselor's office with this argument, in due time to ask them in a sincere attempt, whether or not Frank White's veto was legal. And then it's like, if not through the county counselor, it's like, did you discuss this with any attorney? Like, I know you guys know attorneys. Like, did you discuss this with, or a retired judge, a retired attorney? There's just so many possibilities. Like, you could have asked Charlie. Charlie knows probably, I don't know Charlie personally, but just because he was an attorney, he probably knows other attorneys. He probably knows retired judges that could have given wisdom about this. But the main issue is this whole argument was kind of a slap together argument put forth at the last minute. And I state that because usually in prior years in the Jackson County legislature, and when I say prior years, I mean prior to when this new legislative council was put into power in 2020 in 2023, when the legislature disagreed with Frank White's veto, they would actually put together a document that specifically states the points as to why they're going to try to overrule Frank White's veto, and it's usually like a long essay, and they did not do this. So, like I said, I question the sincerity behind this. I question whether or not they really did do a sincere attempt in order to contact a legal professional to really understand what was going on.
Have to. Where we differ in that opinion, and our difference was correct, as opposed to what council gave us. And if we're having a question like that with budget, something that is this substantial, and if clarity is needed based on the report from our auditor, why would we be denied to seek that clarity? And I agree with Legislator Franklin. I don't know that the state auditor is the answer. But if there is a discrepancy, I think we need another opinion if it is to this extent. So, as you mentioned before, it is customary. But what is allowed that is not customary, that would allow us to have this taken into consideration?
I'm only providing you with what the legal opinion, what we've been doing in the history of the county. So that's what I'm giving you.
And also, Donna, you had 18 days. You had 18 days to go over this, to talk to Konvinsky. If not talk to Konvinsky, talk to somebody in the county counselor's office. If not to talk to somebody in the county counselor's office, you could have found an attorney somewhere and asked them these questions. You could have done so many things. And like I said, a temporary restraining order. But you did not. None of the people did. There was no written document that the legislature put forth giving the specific reasons why they oppose Frank White's veto, which is usually the standard in legislators past, okay? But this legislature does not do that, so it is what it is.
So I haven't been unclear about that, and I'll
Meaning
stand by what
Kavinsky
we
told
said. That's
you
what
this
our
before.
job is here, and we represent the county in that matter. So I'm providing you the rules and the opinion and how this process has worked all along. So.
And I don't doubt for a second that you have looked at the information and that you have come to the best decision possible. Now, I would, and I'm not challenging you on this, but you mentioned that you're working for the county. And if you are, can we sit down and talk about our differences, or are you presenting this on the behalf of the administration?
He works for the
Is
county.
it for the administration in the county, or is it so that this legislative body can be best informed to make the best decision?
I'm applying the law and the code that we've had in this county for years, and that's what I'm continuing to do. That's what our position is.
Okay, thank
And
you.
if someone had a question with it, I'm always available. If anyone texts me, I usually try to provide an answer as quickly as possible.
And with that said, your availability is for us to consult you. Does it have to go to a vote today, or will we have that opportunity to consult further?
I think it's clear that it needs to be done today.
Tracy has a question up here. Basically asks, if the lawyers represent the county, doesn't that mean they represent the legislature too? Yes, they do. They do. And this was one of the reasons why we lost the property tax case back in the summer, was because Sean Smith, our Jackson County legislator, was having ex parte communications with Andrew Bailey, the Attorney General of Missouri, without Jackson County legal counsel present, and which is a violation of our ethics code in law. And due to that, the judge ordered Andrew Bailey to do a deposition just to talk about their communications during those sessions. And Andrew Bailey refused to have the deposition and ultimately dismissed the case, basically killing any attempt for the Jackson County property owners who were relying on this case to actually overturn the property tax assessment to be successful. Yes, we currently have a case that's ongoing right now, which we're going to receive the judge's order on February 17th about the property, whether or not the property tax assessment was valid or not. But it's a different case where we're not talking about the 2023 property tax assessment validity. We're talking about the state tax commissioner's 2024 order ordering Jackson County government to overturn their property tax, their 2023 property tax assessment assessment findings. And so yes, but yes, the county counselor's office is also the attorneys for the legislature.
And that's by the rules of what we've handled on these, on a veto override.
And you're quoting which rule, which section?
Give me a minute and I'll find it for you.
Mr.
Thank you.
Chairman.
Yes.
So, and now they're looking at rules, so I had a question for them, but the thought process was going to be, if someone, hypothetically, and this is maybe a parliamentary question, so for all those who love Robert's Rules of Order, if someone were to have a motion to override the veto, and then it were seconded, and we were in the midst of discussion, and we chose to table that motion until our next meeting, that I believe would be consistent with Robert's Rules of Order. I don't believe that there's anything in our rules of the legislature that prohibit tabling of a motion, and we would still have addressed
Except our
a veto message
ordinance in
today,
our code,
but we would be holding over a final vote until such time as we removed
which
it
the
from the
Robert
table
Rules
and
of
brought it
Order
back.
subject to.
So I guess my question for anybody who thinks they're a parliamentarian is, would that be an approach to leave us more time to consider this and get more information?
Charlie?
There would at least be a thought that we didn't override the veto within 10 days or the next meeting. And that the veto would therefore stand.
Okay. I'm looking for ideas how we can be more informed before we make a decision. So,
I mean, this is the thing is like, yes, it's important to be informed before you make a decision, but you had 18 days. You had 18 days to try to be informed. And from what I've seen on the record is there really was an attempt to be informed because the standard, the baseline is, did you contact an attorney to see if Q. Troy Thomas's analysis was correct? And honestly, with like the interpretations and everything, I don't think that they did.
Madam Clerk, would you go ahead and please call the roll?
Anderson,
No.
Peyton,
So this is the vote to essentially strike the record of Frank White's notice of a veto from the agenda, which I agree with Brian Kavinsky's determination, which would be a violation of not only the Sunshine Laws, but I think it would also be a potential criminal violation of RSMO 575.110, which is tampering with the public record.
No.
Marshall,
No.
Abarca,
Yes.
Husky, Franklin,
No.
Lauer,
No.
Smith,
abstain.
Smith abstains.
McGee.
Yes.
Three yes,
Duran McGee,
5 no, 1
Vanessa
abstain.
Husky, and Manny Abarca are all willing to violate the law in order to get what they want. That's the message.
I
of
will make a
this, which
motion
is
that we
crazy,
move to override the county executive's veto.
in my
Second.
opinion.
Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
I will move to table the motion.
Second.
For discussion purposes, while I recognize that this might not be the best strategy, that's all I got.
Legislator Franklin has a question.
Legislator Franklin.
It seems to me if we do that and the veto is overridden, if we, whatever we do, you could always question whether or not he had the right to veto it in the first place. And if some court, somebody decides that you couldn't, that he never could have vetoed it in the first place, then it seems like the budget would pass. But it seems like tabling this just means we didn't override it within 10 days or our next meeting.
If we adjourn.
Franklin's
But whatever.
interpretation is correct.
Madam Clerk, can you call the roll on table, the motion to table?
Anderson,
No.
Peyton,
Yes.
Marshall,
No.
Abarca,
Yes.
Husky, Franklin,
Yes.
Lauer,
No.
Smith,
Yes.
So the reason why Franklin votes yes on this is because he stated this earlier on is that if they table this, then that means that the veto is going to be upheld since they did not act upon it when they should have, which would have been today. And so that's why Franklin voted yes on this.
McGee,
Yes.
6 yes, 3 no.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes. Legislator Anderson.
I just want to, again, I'm really trying just to kind of understand this here. Didn't we, since the motion was made to override the veto, isn't it maybe I'm wrong. I'm just trying my best here. But since the motion was made to override, and then there was a motion to table said override, didn't that just stop us from voting on deciding if we're going to override the veto or not? But it still leaves in the aspect, because I guess what I'm trying to understand here is that you can't, I mean, and again, I know people are disagreeing about what the charter says, but you know, from being here, you usually have 10 days or the next meeting. I understand that. But didn't that, all that did was just stop us from voting on if we're going to decide to veto or not? It does not throw out the idea that this was the meeting to decide on if we're going to override or sustain the veto? Because I feel like we just hogtied ourselves by that vote. By
I mean,
saying,
you did
I mean,
hogtie yourself.
it's not stopping the process, it's stopping us from voting on it. If anybody wants to say anything.
Okay. I wasn't sure.
Oh.
I mean, I'm assuming it's trying to say that they're gonna vote on a veto override next time, even though it's supposed to be done at this meeting. And I assume that they had the 5 votes for what they're saying is tabling their veto override. Am I saying that correctly?
Point of information, if we recess and not adjourn, that would still continue this meeting.
I mean, now you're getting into interpretations of what we've actually been doing. And usually the next preceding meeting is also, when you read Robert's rules or any type of these rules, it's, the next meeting is like the continuation of the meeting. So this is that meeting when it comes to the veto override. But I understand that you voted otherwise, so.
So basically, they essentially vote to table the veto, which essentially makes it like it's basically what Charlie Franklin said. Since they tabled the veto instead of actually voting on it, this means that the veto was upheld. So that means that right now we're operating off of a 2024 budget because Frank White's veto was not overridden. So that's where we are today. Anyways, thank you so much for sticking through with me through this whole entire talk on the 2025 budget. As of today, we only have access to, or as far as the Jackson County budget goes, we're operating off of the 2024 budget. The county executive or the county legislature still hasn't put forth a new budget amendment in order to amend the current budget that we have, which is the 2024 budget, but they will be able to pursuant to the terms of the charter. And just to illustrate that point again, I'm going to show you guys this. Really quickly before I head out, is this is the power that the state gives to the counties in order to amend the budget, which basically says that on this section, subsection 1, it said any county may amend the annual budget during any fiscal year in which the county receives additional funds. And I'm stopping there to go to section 2. And any county may decrease the annual budget twice during any fiscal year in which the county experiences a verifiable decline in funds of 2% or more. But then we go to section 6, which I stated this section multiple times, that notwithstanding this provision of the section, no charter county shall be restricted from amending its budget under and pursuant to the terms of its charter, okay? And as I stated, Jackson County is a charter county, so that means that we abide by our own rules. And our own rules allows us to amend the budget after the fiscal, after the deadline of December 31st, 2024, okay? So all the county essentially will need to do is to put forth a new budget that will amend the current budget that we have, which is last year's budget. So not everything is lost. Anyways, thank you again for watching this week's edition of Let's Talk Jackson. I hope you guys learned something, and I hope you guys enjoyed the time that you spent with me, really going in depth into Jackson County's budget. This story is not over. As I stated before, Jackson County still hasn't passed their budget, and so they're still operating on the 2024 budget. Not only that, we have the whole ARPA fund situation where we still haven't had any notion of where they're actually going to allocate those ARPA funds. As I stated in the last video, the Jackson County government and the county executive got into an agreement where they're going to spend half of the $70 million on nonprofit or community led projects and the other half on infrastructure, but we still haven't seen those bills pass through. So hopefully that'll happen sooner rather than later. Anyways, thank you again for watching this presentation, and I hope you guys have a great rest of the day. And happy Valentine's Day, happy Black History Month, and have a great evening, everyone. See you.